professional bassist, instructor, and conductor, Mr. Don Baldini.
Welcome
Hello,
back,
Francis.
Don.
It's nice to be back.
Thanks. What's in the suitcase? No, wait, don't tell me yet. Don't tell me yet. Okay.
I brought a few little goodies.
Talk
Okay,
about it.
this is a photo that was taken at the White House. It's kind of a funny picture because it looks like I'm posing, and it looks like Frank and Nancy and Ronnie get in the way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a funny picture.
This must be somewhere between 81 and 89. 8 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this piano, I don't know, you can't see very much, but you can see these kind of Roman goddesses. This is all inlaid in gold. This was built for Bess Truman by the Steinway Company, because Bess Truman was a pianist, an amateur singer, and Steinway built her this beautiful piano. So this was at a state dinner for the president of Sri Lanka, because at the time, apparently Sri Lanka was a strategically important refueling stop. I don't know if it was for the,
For
the Air
Jetson,
Force,
right.
For the Air Force,
Sure.
for the jets that are looking to guard us against missiles or for whatever reason. And it was
Got to get fuel.
particularly interesting because I don't know if you all remember, but there was quite a brouhaha about Nancy Reagan spending a lot of money on special china that she bought for the White House. And we got to have dinner on that china, and it was pretty cool. But we got invited to do this literally a couple of weeks after I started playing with Sinatra. We were in New York, and we got invited to do this state dinner. And Julie Rizzo, who was kind of Frank's bodyguard, who had been with him for years and years, said, "I can't believe you've only been on the job for a week and a half, and you get invited to the White House. I've been here for 30 years. Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, he made it sound like it was a big deal. So we did play at the White House. We got flown to Washington. We took commercial jets. Frank went in a different plane. We did go to the White House. My bass was in a trunk, a travel trunk. The dogs and the Secret Service spent a good hour with my bass. I had to take everything out. I had to take the case off. I had to take everything out of the pockets. The dogs sniffed the instrument, went all over everything.
Sure.
In the meantime, the woman, I think it was actually Nancy's secretary, was really nice and kept apologizing to me for all the trouble
All the
that my
inconvenience.
bass was causing, because it was,
Well-
we were literally going to play in the White House.
Yeah.
I don't know what the name of that room was where they had these little shows, but I remember seeing Obama in that same room and Clinton. And so when I was talking to the secretary, I said, well, I'm going to be forward. I said, I know there's some really valuable Windsor chair. I make Windsor chairs as a hobby. And I said, I know there's some very valuable old Windsor chairs at the White House. She said, absolutely. Would you like to see some of them? I said, I would. So while the dogs were still with the bass, she took me around to all these different places. I don't know what the rooms were, but they were probably famous, rooms that were for
that
guests
was
or whatever.
sweet.
And she would allow me to, I was underneath tables looking at things.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Just the two of you.
Yeah, just the two of us.
Secret Service lurking?
Yes.
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 Uh,
So that particular night, we did rehearse because we wanted to see what the acoustics were going to be like.
yeah.
And of course, that piano was wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was just
Sure.
was Joe Parnello on piano, Tony Mottola on guitar, myself on bass, and Irv Kotler on drums. Just the rhythm section.
Wow.
And Frank did about, I don't know, maybe half hour, 45 minutes.
Oh, man, I would have loved
That
to
was
heard
pretty
that.
cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Ah.
It was pretty cool.
It doesn't get any better than that.
I
Right?
had this little bird in my head that always would say, remember this.
Oh.
Remember this moment. because this is pretty special.
I'll say.
And, afterwards, there was a big reception, and there were all these service groups. They had a little jazz band, they had a string group. And I remember that Irv Kotler and Tony Mottola, the guitar player and the drummer, both were smokers, even though they were both in their 70s, they were still smoking.
Yep.
And they had ducked out one of the doors to smoke a cigarette. And I remember the Secret Service guy came up to me, and you can tell because he's wearing a tux, but he's got on those cop shoes, and he came to me and he said, "Where are your two buddies?" And I wanted to say, I wanted to be a smartass and say, "Well, isn't that your job?"
You're the Secret
But I kept
Service
my
guy.
mouth shut.
Yeah.
And I said, "Who are you talking about?" He said, "The drummer and the guitar player." I said, "I have no idea," but I said, "They're both smokers. Maybe they went out for a cigarette." And he said, "Well, come with me. We've got to find them."
Oh,
So I got another tour of the White House because he did, for some reason, although I mentioned that they were probably outside, he didn't think for some reason that they would be able to get outside. As it turns out, they were outside.
Really?
There were like these French doors,
Yeah.
and they just probably
They just opened them and
one.
walked out.
Maybe they were supposed to be locked. I don't know. But so,
great.
we took about 10 or 15 minutes, and by the time we got back, they had already come back in.
Did they have any idea that they'd caused any of this fuss?
No.
Completely oblivious.
was-
Meanwhile, you've had two tours of the White House, one voluntary,
Right.
one not so
One to
voluntary.
get to look at furniture,
Yeah.
and the other one to just kind of look around. So it was kind of funny. So the other thing about Reagan was we played. Frank Sinatra was at that time the official entertainment director of the White House, and he had this special relationship
Why
with
not?
the Reagans. He didn't have to go through any security clearance,
Oh.
which, of course, considering some of the company he kept in his life is questionable.
Considering the little issue
Yeah.
we talked about in the
Yeah.
previous show.
So,
Yeah. Wow.
I guess it was probably a year or so after this White House dinner that we were invited. Well, Frank, in fact, was in charge, so invited. We were expected to perform at the second inaugural.
Yes.
And God, we were there for probably 10 days. And Frank got Nelson Riddle to be the conductor of the orchestra. And Nelson wrote all kinds
All
of
those
special
arrangements, yeah.
special music. And I remember, oh my God, Lou Rawls was on the show. Federica von Stade, the German opera singer from the Met, was on the show. It was amazing. It was besides the presidential gala, there was a vice presidential gala the night before. So we did both of them. And so the reason
what's in the
I brought
bag?
this suitcase
Yes.
is because
Here, let me help you.
once in a while you get a little bit of a perk. So we were, in fact, I had seen these jackets. In fact, I bought one myself, paid $50 for it, not
Swag.
realizing they were going to give us a jacket. But here's the jacket, the official
Woohoo.
50th American Presidential Inaugural Gala in 1985. It doesn't have Reagan's name on it, but it's got the presidential seal
Beautiful.
in gold
Can you-
thread. And I'm going to show you,
Oh, boy.
believe it or not, I should probably take this thing off, but okay, this jacket was given to all of us that performed, even though, like I said, I had purchased one. So I have another one at home. I didn't bring it today because it doesn't have my name on it. But the back has the presidential seal, and it still more or less fits me. It's probably a collector's item. I don't know what I would do with this. If any of you out there are interested in a Reagan inaugural jacket with my name on it,
Oh, be careful what you wish for.
I don't know. I don't even know what
Some
something like
collector will
this.
go nuts
I
over
mean,
this.
I almost think something like this should go in a museum because
Yeah.
that's probably a curious,
Here, let me take it for you.
curious item. While we're at it,
Yes.
every tour company every Broadway show, every television show. I remember when I did St. Elsewhere, they gave us jackets.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to it, but
Yeah, I don't think they were this
everybody
nice,
did
though.
baseball jackets. So we
Yeah,
had
but
these
this is
touring jackets with
seriously
Frank.
beautifully done.
This said Sinatra in concert. It happens to be black and orange because those were his favorite colors. And again, there's my name on the front, and it says Sinatra Staff. Kind of even
Here, let me
forgot
take that.
I had some of this stuff. And then
This Sinatra
this
Staff.
was actually from the presidential inaugural gala. They also gave out these hats. It doesn't really match the jacket very well. And then this one is from the Academy Awards. 1 year.
Oh, that's great. 61st Annual Academy Awards.
Yeah, this is when Marvin
beautiful.
Hamlish
What's the other one?
was the band leader. This is from the inaugural gala.
1985.
Yeah, that was Reagan.
1985. That's right.
I had another jacket,
Yeah.
but it's a members only jacket. That was from the vice president's gala.
When we were off camera and we were talking about this photo, you said something about a Where's Waldo. Will you?
It's like Waldo's always showing up in these situations, and I had a friend that was a cartoonist that did these two little figures, not in this picture, but like, I don't know who those three people in the front are, but the guy in the back is Don Baldini, one hell of a bass player.
Yeah, it's
So
nice.
anyway,
Is this the same bass that we're looking at?
yes, it is.
So
it is.
do you mind telling the story of this bass? Where you got it? If you don't want to share it, I understand, but
No.
you've had this bass for a long time.
I've had this bass forever. I went to Indiana University on a violin scholarship. I was a violinist. And because I was thinking of the future, I was working on a double degree. I had a degree in performance, which was basically worthless unless you got an orchestra job, which I did.
Yep.
But I also was working on a music ed degree. And I thought, since I played the violin, I could play the viola, that if I learned the cello and the bass, that I could perhaps get a degree in strings as opposed to just violin.
Sure.
So the dean at the time thought it was a good idea. In fact, because of me, they actually included that in their degree program.
Oh.
So I decided to take bass lessons first because I was interested in jazz. And one of my classmates, a girl from Chicago, her last name was Sklar, of all things, who's also a famous bass player, by the way, Lee Sklar. I don't remember what her first name was, but she had decided that music wasn't for her, and she had bought this bass in Chicago at a company called Kagan and Gaines. They were a big music company in Chicago, and she paid $300 for it, and she charged me the same amount, and for another $50, I got this giant trunk that was made by the Chicago Trunk Company, which was like a steamer trunk, but it's big enough
for this,
to
right?
hold a bass.
Yeah.
And I used that trunk when I was with Sinatra, somewhere in the late 60s or early 60s.
Now, you know the question I'm going to ask because I already know the answer.
Because
but
I
nobody would
graduated
believe
high
it.
school in 59.
Yeah.
So I started in Indiana probably in 1960. No, probably in 59. So I bought this from her in 1959.
Yep.
Because it was the fall. No, excuse me. Would have been the next year.
1960.
First year I was a violinist.
1960.
Would have been 1960. So I've had this since 1960.
Yeah.
And have never, ever thought about selling it. No, I don't know the next question. What is the next question?
As soon as I ask you, you'll laugh and you'll know. How many times you changed the strings since 1960?
Okay. She's asking this question because she knows that I changed the strings when Nixon left the White House in 1974, I think that was.
Yeah.
And I put a set of Tomastic Spiracores, which has this red label.
Yep.
And they've been so good, I have not changed them in all those years. I'm not really good with math, but
I still say that we should go for
74, 84, 94, 2004.
almost 2024. We're 1 year away from 2024.
So what is that?
50 years.
50 years, 49 years.
Yeah.
I should call the Tomastic company. I probably
Wow.
set some kind of a world record.
Well,
because
actually-
those strings have been on lots of records,
Yes.
lots of concerts.
Yes. And they still sound perfect.
They still sound perfect.
And they still play perfectly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I haven't changed them.
No, I seriously do wonder if that's some sort of world record.
It might be. It
I mean,
might
it'd be
be.
an interesting thing to know. Yeah.
I do have new strings, but every time I go to put them, well, as you know, typically today I play through an amplifier.
Right.
And so the strings are a little bit deader than they would be if they were new. In other words, they don't ring quite so
Right,
long.
right.
And that's desirable
That's a
when you're
good
playing
thing when
through
you're
an
playing through an amp.
amplifier because they're more controlled.
That's right.
Well, all right. So let's get back to Reagan. Let's get
Okay.
back.
I'm sorry to.
Let's get back to the inaugural gala for a
Yes,
second.
please. All this swag.
So,
Incredible.
so we were kind of the host. We were the host musicians. Of course, Nelson Riddle was hired to conduct the orchestra. He wrote some special material, which was incredible. He kind of ripped off the Ann Copeland Fanfare for the Common Man.
Oh, yep.
And he wrote that kind of for the opening overture. And we did that. Nelson conducted for all the acts, including Lou Rawls, who didn't bring his own conductor.
Oh.
We rehearsed for I don't know how many days. The Gatlin brothers were there. I remember Donna Summer was there. Like I said, Frederica von Stade, who came in, and we actually accompanied her. I can't remember what she sang, but it was something more pop-oriented. She didn't do opera. I remember she brought Ian Fraser with her, who I knew from Las Vegas, who was Anthony Newley's conductor, and it was fun to see him. So we get to the gala. Of course, it's a big deal. Frank is the host, and one of the things that was really interesting was Mikhail Baryshnikov was in town doing something.
Boy.
And Frank found out about it, or Mikhail found out about us. And early on in his career, when he was with Martha Graham, he had done a famous improvisational, well, I should say, he choreographed
Beautiful.
a dance, a solo dance,
Yep.
with a lamppost and a trench coat
Yes.
to the music of Frank Sinatra.
Yes. Yep.
And he was a young guy. I guess he
Yeah.
was like in his early 20s.
Oh.
So
He was
he
so
finds
gorgeous to
out that
watch.
we're doing, and so without any rehearsal, he shows up at the gala, and Frank tips off Tony Mottola and I and Joe, because we're the only ones that play, on One for My Baby. And here we are in the middle of the show, not rehearsed. Frank takes off the tie, sits on the side of the stage. I guessing it was probably Jack Daniels, although it was in a coffee cup, but sits on the side of the stage, lights up a cigarette, which I can't even imagine was permissible.
Yeah. Right.
And suddenly a little pin spot comes on, and they put an old-fashioned lamppost on the stage, and here comes Baryshnikov up the steps, because it was a raised stage, almost like a boxing arena. And there he is with the trench coat, and he too has got the tux with the open collar, just like Frank. And we do, it's 2:45, there's no one in the place. And he starts dancing. And I remember saying to myself, remember this moment. This is pretty special. You've got, first of all, two giants of entertainment.
Oh, my gosh,
Frank
yes.
Sinatra
Yeah.
with this definitive Harold Arlen song, which a lot of people have recorded,
Oh, yeah.
including Tony Bennett.
Oh, it's such
But
a
no
good
one
song.
ever did it like Frank.
No.
No one ever did it even close to Frank. And it's a song about unrequited love, a guy with a broken heart who's singing about his lost love. And here we are with Baryshnikov dancing and Frank singing. And it was like just this magical. And of course the audience was mesmerized. When the thing finished, I remember there was a good 3 or 4 seconds, which is a long time
Yes.
for no applause.
Dead silence.
And
Right.
then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
people started to clap, but it was really magical.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was amazing. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And to think that, I was actually playing while he was dancing. It was just amazing.
You know it when you're in that magic moment, right? You know right then, something is different about this.
Yeah.
It's the zone. At that one time, everything comes together, it's all seamless, it's all easy, and people feel it.
Well, and what Frank did, the drink and the cigarette,
Oh, yeah.
completely
come on.
appropriate
Yeah.
for the song.
Yeah.
And, you know, here we were,
Yeah.
nobody's going to come say, oh, Mr. Sinatra, you can't smoke on stage. I mean, it was just one of those magical moments that happens, you know, every now and then in show business.
I hear that song in my head right away.
You know,
Yeah.
but again,
One for my baby.
that song, no one will ever do it
One more
better
for
than
the
Frank
road.
Sinatra did it.
But he's just
He had a way,
he's just talking to you.
in fact, to this day,
Incredible.
one of my favorite songs is the Matt Dennis song, Angel Eyes.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Angel Eyes.
Sure.
Da, da, da,
oh, haunting
da.
melody, right.
But
Right.
Frank started it with, so drink up all of you people.
Yep.
Oh, which is the
Started
bridge.
with the bridge, right. That's
But
right. Yeah.
it's the perfect opening. I don't know why everybody doesn't start that song with,
I
so
don't know.
drink up all of you people.
Yeah.
Order anything you see. Have fun, you happy people. The drink and the laughs on me. Try and say
That's
that
right.
love's not around. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, oh
no,
my
it,
God.
It should have been written that way, actually, because that bridge is really like a verse. And
Well,
if you
speaking
sing it
of
like a verse,
verses,
there it is.
I've got this wonderful recording called Sinatra and Strings, which Don Costa, the beloved Don Costa, who wrote for all kinds of people, did the entire album. But they do Stardust. Da 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 da, twilight time, da 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 dee da 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 dee,
Yep.
da da dee da 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 da, da 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 dee da dee da da.
Right.
And that's all they do. They
That's
don't
it.
ever go da 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 da
Sometimes I
da da.
wonder.
They
Right,
never do
that, yeah.
the refrain.
Yeah.
They just do the verse, and it sounds complete.
That's all it needs.
Who
Yeah.
would have had the guts to do that?
I don't know, but that's clever. I mean, that's
It's extremely clever.
clever, clever.
I mean, he would do stuff like that. And he just had this kind of innate sense of, you know, he really didn't know anything about music. I mean,
Frank.
I think people think that a Frank Sinatra must have been able to play an instrument or studied music theory. And no, he did not. He had tremendous gut instincts. I will say, I think he worked very closely with his arrangers. I think he had a really good idea. I guess we got off track
Of
here,
what he
but
wa- that's okay.
I think he had a really good idea of what worked for him,
Yes.
very versus various other people. But he was spot on,
Yeah. He really had everything he needed for tools in his bag to
and
get that
he did
done.
not screw around.
Yeah.
He let the song.
Yeah, he sang
He
it.
had the same.
He sang it. He
You
felt
know,
it.
Carson had the ability to let the guests shine.
Mm-hmm.
Frank had the ability to let the song shine.
Yep.
He never played around. He didn't over vocalize. I mean,
Yeah.
if you listen to his version of most of these songs,
Yep.
they're pretty straightforward. You know, another great artist, the Velvet Fog, Mel Torme. But Mel Torme wants to show you all the things he can do within
But
the
that's-
course of 132 bar. And
But
it
that's
gets-
his thing. That's
that
Mel
was his
Torme's thing.
thing.
That's what people listen
but
to
it
Mel Torme
doesn't
for.
do the song justice the way Frank did.
Yeah, it's a
And
different
Ella
audience.
had that simplicity.
Yes, yeah.
You know, yes, she could
Straightforward. She
scat,
could scat.
probably better than anybody. But Ella let the song alone.
Yeah,
She had the respect for the song.
yeah, it's true.
And let's face it, you know, I really don't listen to music, pop music today. It just, you know, I used to talk about improvisation in my classes at the college by using the metaphor of the box of Crayolas that we all started with the 8 colors. And then eventually you worked up to, you went to
64.
your friend's house
Whatever.
with the big box with the 64 colors.
Yeah.
We had the 64 colors, now we've gone back to the 8 colors.
Yeah.
Why would you want to do that? I don't understand it.
I don't have the answer, but
Yeah.
it does beg the question. If a Frank Sinatra showed up today, what happens?
What would he do?
Without the big
What
production.
kind of music would he be doing? I remember reading that Johnny Mercer spent an entire year on the lyrics of Skylark.
Well,
I mean, when
boy,
you have people like
they're
Johnny
terrific
Mercer
lyrics, I mean.
and Irving Berlin and
Yeah.
Cole Porter
Yep.
and Richard Rodgers. I
Rodgers
mean,
and-
these
right.
people.
Yeah.
Richard Rodgers, who wrote with Larry Hart
Yeah,
one way and wrote totally different with Oscar Hammerstein. And I mean, do you know
Right.
that Frank's first gold
different.
record was "Strangers in the Night"?
Oh,
Do you know that Nancy? Now, I'm 99% sure I'm correct in this, but if I'm wrong, somebody call in. But I believe Nancy had a gold record with Boots
Nancy Sinatra,
before
right?
Frank had a gold record with Strangers.
Oh,
With
that's,
all the
that's quite
recordings that
possible.
Frank made, I don't think he ever had a gold record and he hated, because
Yeah.
he hated that Scooby-Dooby-Doo. I love Strangers in the Night. I think it's a
Yeah.
great song. But I'm just saying, it's crazy
Yep.
when you think about it.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing all of this and for sharing all your stories with us, and I hope we can continue to do this.
Okay. You mentioned Carson. It's funny. When I picked up my phone this morning, I guess it was on Instagram. There was for some reason they posted a Tonight Show when Sinatra was on, and Johnny was asking questions. As Johnny, he always seemed to be better than anybody else. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because I don't think a lot of people realize that Frank was fairly deep intellectually, and that people were surprised. Anyway, the question that Johnny asked Frank was, "Hey Frank, when you get in a romantic mood, whose records do you listen to?" And then Frank made a joke and said, "I listen to Jerry Fail instead of Jerry Vale." But he actually really said he listened to things like Daphnis to Chloe and various pieces of classical music. He mentioned opera, and the comments in the Instagram where people were surprised that he would, allude to listening to classical music, but he was a big fan of opera. He was a big fan of literature. He read a lot. He painted. He was actually a decent painter.
Yes.
So, there's often a side to these people that we often forget. But it made me think about when Frank was in Vegas, he would most often go to hear Vic Damone, who he admired a lot. Now, Vic had this incredible voice, but never had the ability to weave it into a song that would capture you the way Frank did.
Yeah, Frank was amazing for that.
I think Frank always wished he had Vic's voice.
Yep.
But Frank had this way of tailoring a song that made people feel that he was singing directly to them,
Yes, he did.
which was part of the charm. But anyway, getting back to Vic Damone, and I started thinking about what we'd talk about today, and I was realizing I came across something in my jewelry box. It's a badge from the Italian American Police Association in Chicago, Illinois. I didn't work with Vic in Las Vegas. He had another bass player that kind of came with the Riviera Hotel. A guy named John Worcester was a friend of mine. But when Vic would go out of town, he would always call me. And so he called one day and said, "Come on, we're going to Chicago to play for my Uncle Frank." And so it was myself and Joey Preston was the drummer, and John Caleffi, the guitar player, who used to play on the Lucy Show.
Oh.
And then Joe Parnello, who was the conductor of Vic Damone and eventually became Frank's conductor. That's how I got on Frank's gig, because of my association with Joe Parnello.
yeah.
So anyway, we're on the plane, and when we get close to O'Hare, the stewardess comes out and talks to us and says, now you boys are going to be deplaning first because you're going to be met on the tarmac. And we said, what are you talking about? Well, you're playing for the Italian American Police Association, and they're going to meet you. You're not going to go through the terminal. They're going to come and pick you up. You don't have to worry about your bags. We'll
really?
send them to the hotel and all that stuff. Huh. Okay, so anyway, yeah. So we land, and of course they put the stairs out, and sure enough, there's a limo sitting there with 2 detectives, and we deplane, and Vic was already there. This was just the musicians, just the 4 of us. And so we get in the limo, and these 2 guys turn around, they say, they introduce themselves. One of them was one of the guys on this card. I think his name was Frank Riccio. They were all Italians. And they said, now, anything you boys want, just ask, and we mean anything. And
Can I see it?
And I'm going like, what do you mean by anything? And he said, I mean anything. Well, of course, I wouldn't touch that. But so we go to the hotel, and I believe we're staying at the Hilton. Excuse me, not the Hilton. The Conrad Hilton. Yes, which was in Chicago. Big, famous hotel. So I'm up in the room, and I'm barely unpacked, and the phone rings, and it's Vic. And he says, get down to the lobby in 5 minutes. My Uncle Frank's taking us out to dinner.
Uncle Frank.
So we go downstairs, and again, it's detectives that are picking us up.
Sure.
And we go out to one of the suburbs, River Forest, and we go to this restaurant, and we go through the back door, through the kitchen, into this kind of room that was kind of like a banquet room.
Yeah.
And here's this guy sitting there with a black suit, a black tie, with about 3 guys on each side of him. And this is his Uncle Frank, whose name is Frank Bruno, which is an alias because his real name is Frank Buccetti, whose father was Machine Gun Frank Buccetti, who was the head of Murder Incorporated, which was Al Capone's hit squad. This is his Uncle Frank, his friend, the guy that's kind of hosting us for the weekend. Now, I don't know what connection he had with the Italian American Police Association, but they all seem to be interconnected. The man of the year for that year was Jimmy Durante, who's really? Also Italian.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, the first thing, of course, he introduces himself, and he's the nicest guy. And we start, kibitzing and talking. And the next thing you know, we're at this restaurant, and they start bringing out all this fish. Now, I assume this is dinner.
Yeah.
Thank God Vic turns to one of us and says, by the way, this is only the first course.
Pace yourself.
We're going to many more restaurants. And we said, oh, really? So now this is a place that was famous for Lake Michigan, perch
Sure.
and whitefish and
fresh.
lake trout and things like that. So we go there and we have our fish, and then we get back in the cars and we go to another restaurant. The next restaurant was the Antipasto restaurant, with the salami and the mortadella.
It's a progressive party.
Yeah,
right.
and the artichokes and the olives.
Oh.
And the whole time Uncle Frank is being Frank Buccetti is being really nice. He finds out that he asks me where I'm from. I say I'm from Racine, Wisconsin, which is about 50 miles north of Chicago. And he starts asking me about my dad, and my dad, of course, was still alive then. And he said, well, does he want to come to the concert tomorrow night? And I said, I don't know. I could call him. And he said, call him up. I'll send a car up for him. So I called my dad. He said, sure, I'd love to come. So sure, I mentioned to Frank, Uncle Frank, and he said, I'll take care of it. So he did. The next night, my dad showed up and came to the concert with his current wife, my stepmother. Anyway, so now we go to the third restaurant for the pasta. And I remember at the time, Joe and I went into the men's room, and we're in the men's room. I said, man, they're trying to kill us with food. I mean, this is like getting absurd. Because, the whole thing is, when you go, they're going to bring food put it on the table. You got to eat it.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, oh,
you
yeah.
don't want to leave an
You don't
empty
wanna-
plate.
You don't want to insult Uncle Frank for
and
sure, right?
And then,
Yeah.
then after the pasta place, we took a rest, and we had a few drinks. We had some wine. Then we went to another place we had veal, we had chicken, we had beef.
come
We had
on.
just
After
like
all
just
those-
unbelievable. So anyway, the Italian American Police Association, we give this. We have no rehearsal. We're basically just going to play with Vic, so we know our stuff. But as it turns out, it was at the Hilton Hotel in the big ballroom, the Conrad Hilton, which I think was as I remember, was like the flagship for the Hilton chain. Huge hotel in Chicago, and we went and we did the gig. Vic, of course, was very well received, and then Jimmy Durante came out and did his shtick, and then afterwards we also got together for another big meal. We didn't go to different places. This was all at the Hilton, and they gave us all this badge as a kind of a memory of the occasion. So I just thought.
I peeked in that pocket. So,
Oh.
But please finish your thought. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and they gave us, my name was Baldwin in those days because
That's what I wanted to
when
ask.
my father came to America, his name was Giovanni Salvatore Baldini, but he had forged papers because he was underage. So when he became a resident of America, he was always nervous that he was going to get deported
Yeah, it'd be disgusting.
because he was underage.
How old
So
was he? when
he
came?
was 15.
Wow.
Yeah, he was underage to come through Ellis Island.
Gutsy.
And so
Gutsy.
he changed it to Baldwin.
Yep.
So that was my
Yeah.
christened name. I changed it back.
I remember one time we were rehearsing or something, and I noticed one of your cases
Yes.
said Baldwin.
Yes.
And I asked you, I said, did you change it to Baldwin because somebody on the road didn't want an Italian name?
Because there was such a, there was such prejudice against
Right.
Irish people,
Right.
Italian people, whatever.
Dan, why
Well, in
did
fact,
you
it
change
worked just the opposite with me because people like Sinatra, although he knew me as Baldini,
Hey, paisan.
because thank God Joe Parnello introduced me as Baldini,
Yeah.
even though my name officially was Baldwin.
Yep.
And my checks said Baldwin,
Yeah.
but Frank never
Parnello
knew me.
knew, yeah.
But people like Frank would say, "What do you think? Are you ashamed of your heritage?
Right,
Why
right.
did you change it?" Well, I would have never changed my name.
Yeah.
But my father did it because he was afraid of getting deported.
Hmm.
So
For people who don't know Victimone, for younger people who might be watching this and don't know anything about Victimone, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, he was gorgeous. He was a really, really good-looking man. In fact, I don't remember. I remember he was married to Pier Angeli, who was a young, beautiful Italian star. But Vic's last marriage was to Diane Carroll, who was also very beautiful. And I remember seeing the two of them at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas because he came to see Frank. And the two of them were like just stunning. But Vic was really good looking. And he was somewhat of a movie star besides being a singer. He had this unbelievable voice.
Yeah.
He had this gift
Yeah.
of this gorgeous voice. But he never had quite the savvy that say Frank did or Tony Bennett did for, shaping a song. But well, as a follow-up to this dinner, now Vic was a sweet guy. How do I say this politely? As Robin Williams would have said, he was a couple tacos short of a combination plate. Vic was simple,
Yeah.
and he would do questionable things. For example, as we're eating with Uncle Frank, Vic is saying, "Yeah, you got to come and visit me in Vegas because I'm there 4 times a year, and I've got this boat. I keep it on Lake Mead, and we can go fishing." So Uncle Frank does come to visit Vic a couple of months later, and the minute he steps off the plane, the gaming commission tells him that he has to turn around because basically he's a known wise guy from Chicago. And Vic got into all kinds of trouble for even inviting him to Las Vegas to be his guest. So, he never thought of that, but there you go. Another funny story about Vic. Just to follow up, Vic had an incredible voice. Joe Parnello did all his arrangements. They were wonderful. He was a great lounge act. He never was a main room act for some reason in Vegas. He always worked the lounge at the Riviera. I don't understand why.
It's funny, his name is so well known.
It is. One of his big songs was, I have often walked on the street before.
Yes.
And he had this beautiful tenor voice that was just unbelievable. Another quick Vic story. When I first worked with Sinatra, I was with Harry James.
Yes.
I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace. Frank had been banned from Nevada. He had an incident at the Sands.
A little incident.
And
he had a little incident.
He pulled a gun on
involving a
somebody.
weapon.
He and Dean Martin were upset over the fact that
Yeah.
the blackjack dealer was using a shoe. There were 4 or 5 decks
Yep.
instead of using one deck. Anyway,
They didn't like that.
yeah, so he lost. Frank was part owner of the Calaneva Lodge up in Lake Tahoe. He lost his gambling license, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know.
Even if you're Frank Sinatra, you don't get to do that.
No.
Yeah.
But the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace was able to convince the gaming board that, Sinatra would be a good thing for business. And so anyway, he worked out a deal at Caesar's Palace. And he thought it would be fun and interesting to put Frank with his original band, Harry James. So Frank was in Los Angeles. Well, he lived in Palm Springs, but we rehearsed in Los Angeles. Frank was part owner of a record label called Reprise. And it was his office and his Reprise studios were on the Warner Brothers lot. I don't know what the connection was with Warner Brothers. But anyway, we went there to rehearse with Frank. The Harry James Band went to Los Angeles. We stayed at a hotel in Hollywood, and we rehearsed with Frank every day at the soundstage at Warner Brothers. The night we were coming home, a couple of the guys, my friend Marty Harrell and both trombone players, and Jim Hunsinger, they both were also playing with Vic, because Vic was a lounge act. You could do Harry's set and do the lounge act. They dovetailed against each other.
Yep.
So we were driving back from Los Angeles, and one of us had to go to the bathroom, and we stopped the car out in the desert. And as we were relieving ourselves, there was this light on the horizon that looked like just a white, bright light, like you would see on an airplane, but it wasn't moving. And while we were outside the car, and by the way, there was no traffic at all. This was, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I remember we were trying to get back so these guys could do the show with Vic at 10 o'clock at the Riviera. So it was somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And this light suddenly moved and came right above us. Now, it was really high, but we both the 3 of us, we all went like, oh my God, what is this? So we didn't want to believe it was a flying saucer or anything like that.
Did you hear any sound?
No sound.
No sound.
But the reason I'm telling you this is when Hunsinger and Marty got back to the Riviera, they mentioned to Vic that we had seen this strange occurrence. Well, either Vic had knowledge or, anyway, he was good friends with a colonel from Nellis Air Force Base, which was a big Air Force base outside Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Now, maybe Vic had talked to this guy and had some previous knowledge, but when the set was over, Marty and Jim get off the bandstand, and here's these Air Force guys waiting to talk to them. Because Vic had called his friend and said, hey, my guys saw, and now maybe Vic knew that this had been a common occurrence in the days or the weeks leading up to our encounter.
Right.
But this colonel said to Jim and Marty, we've been tracking this thing for a long time. We've sent up fighter jets to try to confront this light, and they've never been able to even get close. When they get close, it just goes away. And I don't want to say what it is, but it's definitely a UFO. So, Goody Two Shoes Vic had to call the Air Force colonel, so that was kind of an interesting, yeah.
Well,
Boy, I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, I don't either.
What could you possibly
I mean,
say
I never
about that?
really believed in that stuff.
You just don't know. What you know is that you saw something that didn't seem
Well, we know
normal to you
now
without
that,
sound,
that
right?
there's countless hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation that the Air Force has had.
Well, I mean, a
with these-
UFO is just unidentified flying object, right?
Yeah.
We don't know if little green men get out of
No,
them,
we
or it's
don't
just
know
something we
that.
don't know, but it's not identified.
No,
Yeah.
we don't know that.
No,
we
and
don't
you
know
know,
that. I don't know if he was trying to score points with his friend
Yeah.
or whatever, but that was typical of the kind of thing he would do.
That's funny.
He was always kind of the vigilante kind of type person. That
Yeah.
if something was going on that was illegal or out of the question.
when was this? What years do you think this was? Can you place this for me somewhere in your timeline?
This would have been probably the late '60s,
Okay, huh? And
somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to drag you off topic, but you mentioned Diane Carroll,
Yes.
fabulous vocalist. Do you have
Fabulous.
stories about Diane Carroll?
Well, the only story I have about her is that I was a big fan. A lot of people don't realize they knew her. There was a show called Julia
Yes.
where she played a woman doctor, and I think it was the first African American that got a starring role in a sitcom
Yeah.
ever.
It's very popular. I think
It
you're
was
right.
very popular, and people don't realize what a good singer. I knew she was a singer because the Modern Jazz Quartet had done an album about the Commedia dell'arte in Europe, and there was I think it was called Columbina, and she sang this ditty that John Lewis wrote, this suite.
Yeah.
And it was Diane Carroll, and that was the first time I had ever heard her. But it's interesting because when Johnny Carson retired, and the weeks leading up to his retirement, he did a lot of reminiscing about things that had been on the show.
Yes.
And of course, one of the things was he talked about all the people that had done New York, New York on the show. And, obviously Sinatra was identified with that song.
Sure.
But tons of other people had done that song. Liza Minnelli, for one,
Had
and
recorded
Diane
it.
Carroll. As it turns out, they put like a sort of a retrospective of all the people. I don't know how they did it, because believe it or not, a lot of them were in similar keys.
I was just going to ask
But
that.
as it turns out, Diane Carroll was the knockout.
Yeah.
She did a better job than Frank
Really?
on that song. Yeah.
What was
yeah.
it you liked about it?
She just, I don't know. It was just, that's a great question. She just gave it an energy, a lightness. Frank's was bop, bop, bop.
Right.
I don't know. I never saw it's from a show, a movie that was done basically called New York, New York.
Yeah, right.
Starring Robert De Niro
Yep.
playing a tenor saxophone player. And Liza, of course, was in it.
Right.
I never saw the original movie. I never saw how the song was treated. But Don Costa, a good friend of mine, wrote that classic arrangement for Frank.
Oh, right.
And that's become
Of course.
synonymous now and identified with New York. I think they even probably play it at some point when they dropped a ball on New Year's Eve. I mean, that's become, that introduction is as iconic as the da-ba-da-da-da,
Yes.
the Singing in the Rain
Of course, yeah.
introduction.
No, it's like Name That Tune. As soon as you
Yes.
hear the first couple of notes,
Yeah,
you know it.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
way you're going to miss that. Same thing
Yeah.
with Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Yeah.
So, well, do we have time for you to tell a story about Mac the Knife?
Since the bass is here, Frank had done a recording with Quincy Jones, and the name of the album was "L.A. Is My Lady," and Quincy had written this song. They were trying to get a song to identify with Los Angeles. It never caught on, like no LA song. I mean, the only LA song is "Hooray for Hollywood."
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
that's. But anyway, "LA Is My Lady." He recorded it with Quincy, and on that album, they did "Mac the Knife." And Ray Brown, a famous bass player,
Ray Brown.
who was with Oscar Peterson, and
Yep.
we all idolized.
Yeah. Exactly.
He had done a little introduction. Now, I never heard the album, but Frank decided he wanted to do it in the show. So he rarely talked to the musicians, but he says to me, "I want to do a bass introduction." And I said, "So the song's in the key of G, right?" He said, "Yeah, and make it simple, because I always have trouble finding my pitch." So this is what happened.
Can't go far.
I
It's
can't.
okay.
I think
Go
I'm
ahead.
okay.
You can do it.
I thought to myself, okay,
Help you.
well, it's in the key of G. Let's see, what can I do? And I thought to myself, well, in music, there's a chord called a dominant seventh chord. That's, which leads you to, okay, so I thought, all right, I'll stake around the dominant seventh chord. So I started fooling around, and like Frank's right there. We're at a rehearsal. We're in New York at Carnegie Hall. There's a 90-piece orchestra, and he's like kind of putting me on the spot, and I go like, well, oh, the shark has, and that was it.
You got it.
And he loved it. He said, "Oh my God, that's so great!" Blah 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 blah. So that was it. I mean, I spent, zero seconds thinking about it. But as it turns out, it worked out really well. And I don't know what was on the original recording, but me doing that little lick wound up being on a recording we did live at the Meadowlands.
Yes.
And so, when I'm driving in the car listening to Sirius radio, once in a while I'll hear my little lick. Now, when I left Frank, the couple people that followed me didn't do it quite the same, and it didn't. I didn't think it worked so well, but and I don't know if he eventually took it out of the show or whatever.
But it's on the Meadowlands album.
But it's on the Meadowlands album,
You
yeah,
bet.
that little introduction. There's nothing to it, but it worked, and it set him up. And he was able to find his bit. And you as a singer, you know what that's like.
Yes.
Musicians tend to forget that they're accompanists when they're working with singers. They're not there to be the star,
Well, we love them. So
and
I have so many questions for you, but we're out of time again.
We are.
So will you come back and do another show?
absolutely.
The last time you were here in the studio, your wife, Rebecca, had been taking down names of people that you worked with, and you had put them in your little black book. And I took just a glance at your little black book. Now, I've blown it up here so that I can see it, and I just want to play like a little word association. If I mention somebody, I know you will have a story.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Who should we start with?
How about Toshiko Akiyoshi?
Toshiko Akiyoshi, very, very special lady. She's actually Manchurian. When she was very young, she fell in love and married a very famous alto player on the Stan Kenton band by the name of Charlie Mariano. legendary, downbeat pole winner. They got married, moved to this country, and she wound up going to the Berkeley School and studying music. They, at some point, got divorced. She then wound up in New York and married a tenor player by the name of Lou Tabakin, who is also a very, very excellent tenor saxophone. They eventually moved to Los Angeles, and she started what we used to call a rehearsal band or a kicks band. In other words, musicians to get together to play someone's arrangements for fun of it and for the challenge of just getting to play new music.
Keeping
I
your
can't
chops
think of
up.
any other. Can you imagine a bunch of accountants getting together on a Saturday night and working numbers? Can you imagine any other profession
To keep their
that does
chops
this?
up? I don't know.
You and I both have the association with the AMS
yeah.
Jazz Orchestra that gets together once a month and play. Right. I mean, musicians do this all over the country. So anyway, getting back to Toshiko, she started this band, and because it was Los Angeles, and because of the caliber of musicians there, the band had some pretty accomplished players.
Now, when we're saying she started a band, we're talking about a big band.
A big band, yeah. 5 saxes, 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, rhythm section. She's a pianist.
17 pieces total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful pianist. In fact, she made quite a few recordings on her own. But anyway, she was a huge fan and was influenced a lot by Duke Ellington. At some point, Lou, her husband, convinced her that some of the arrangements she had been doing were worthy of getting some players together. So anyway, she started this big band. And Gene Chirico was the bass player, who was the bass player with Sinatra, who I followed with Sinatra. I also followed him on the Toshiko band. So anyway, what happened is that he got an unexpected call from something having to do with Sinatra and had to miss a rehearsal. So they were looking for a bass player. And Bobby Shue, a very renowned lead trumpet player, who was a friend of mine who I knew from Las Vegas, had heard that I'd moved to town. So, luckily I was home. Luckily I had my act together. Luckily my car was working. So I get a call, hey, Baldini, I hear you're in town. Get your butt down to the Musicians Union. We're having a rehearsal with Toshiko. So I knew about the band, and so I went down there, and I've always been a good reader. Her music was extremely difficult. And she wrote out everything herself. She did not hire a copyist, which was expensive.
Yeah.
She never studied calligraphy. Musical notation is a work of art. Her handwriting was not good.
Oh, dear.
It was very difficult to read. And so apparently when they had been looking for bass players in the past, they had gone through a lot of guys that couldn't read the music. And then in a lot of cases, she would just say, in other words, the changes, or know what's going on. Or
that's your instruction on the
or
sheet?
she would write out, say, 12 bars at the beginning, and then she would just kind of, ditto it. So it was very difficult. You had to have a good memory.
Yeah.
And so,
well, your reading skills have always been very strong.
I was in Las Vegas. I read everything from the big stars to Russian bear acts and dog acts from Yugoslavia. And, her music was known to be very difficult. I had heard other people talk about it. And as it turns out, it's a very funny thing about life and the music business especially. One thing often leads to another. So anyway, I'll get to what it led to, which was really important. So I go in, I'm kind of rumpled because I didn't even take a shower, and I go in and I play, and they love it. I play with the drummer Peter Donald, who was a kind of, he had really great time, great rhythm, great sense of tempo, but he also was very creative.
Yeah.
And she did not play piano very much on the band. So
Oh, really?
basically the rhythm section was bass and drums. Typically in a big band you have piano, often guitar.
Or guitar, right, and
you know,
guitar,
playing the
right.
chords. So it was unusual in that respect. But I'm not a fancy player. My claim to fame is time.
Yeah, you lock
You
it
know,
in.
I mean,
you lock
you
it
could
in.
shoot me, and I would
It's
still.
true.
I
It's
mean,
really
I
true.
literally, you know, I'm not bragging, but
No
I mean
matter
that's
what.
my thing.
No matter
I
what,
can
we
keep
can always
a tempo
count on you.
forever, and you know, my biggest problem, most places, is that, you know, tempos like to drop. Well, anyway, so I
Song
did a
takes
good
off.
job, I guess, and a couple of the guys, Lou Tobacco for one, and a couple of the other members of her band were playing on the Tonight Show band. So I guess the word was out that Toshiko's bass chair was difficult, and other people had tried to do it. And so they went to the rehearsal that day with Doc and said, "Oh, hey, this guy came in and read Toshiko's book." So guess what? A week later, I get called to sub on the Tonight Show. So I guess if there's any young people watching, you know, the lesson to learn from this is you are always on stage at Carnegie Hall, which is what my old teacher, Elmer Salama, told me. In other words, in the music business, you can never have a bad day or a down moment. You need to be your best all the time because you never know. I had no idea that going and playing with Toshiko's rehearsal would wind up in me getting a call for the Tonight Show. Had I not done a good job, I wouldn't have been, they wouldn't have gone and said to Doc, "Oh, this guy came in and read Toshiko's book." And the next thing you know, I'm getting called to sub on the Tonight Show. So that turned out to be, Bobby Shue's call to me turned out to be a very, very important milestone in my musical career because in subbing on the Tonight Show, word gets around, hey, there's this new guy in town. Within the first week, he's playing with Toshiko and he's subbing on the Tonight Show. We better check this guy out.
Who is this
so
cat?
suddenly I became like, you know, maybe not desirable, but a curiosity anyway. And so I started getting other calls. So it's really interesting. You know, had I not been home that morning, had I been somewhere else, had I been hungover, you know, et cetera, that would have been it. And I also used to tell my students that the door doesn't open. You know, it squeaks open maybe a half an inch.
Yeah.
And that's when
Get
you
in
make
there.
your move.
Get in there,
There's
yeah.
no such thing as like the perfect opportunity. And
You know-
it's almost always when you don't expect it. Well, getting back to Toshiko. So as it turned out, it was a very satisfying band. And initially, we got a lot of attention because it was a true jazz band. I mean, we were not playing anything that was commercial at all. In fact, most of her background, of course, is Asian. And so a lot of her music related to her upbringing and her Asian background. She had a couple of pieces which involved Asian musicians. You know, there's certain types of drums and there's like a wooden flute. Anyway, so she wrote some of that into the compositions. And so we played, you know, a few clubs around Los Angeles. We did go up to the Monterey Jazz Festival, which was up in Northern California. Then, within a few months, we started getting recognized. You know, we won some Downbeat Awards, and we went to Japan. The first time, I think we went for 5 or 6 weeks, which was a huge undertaking.
You take a
because
17-piece
taking that
band.
many musicians. You know, I mean, it's one thing to go to Europe, where we've all kind of been raised in that culture. The culture in Japan is totally different. In fact, I remember her saying to some of the guys, and of course they didn't believe her, if you guys want coffee in the morning, bring some instant coffee, because all the hotel rooms have tea-making paraphernalia, but they
Not
don't
coffee.
have people. In Japan, going out for coffee is like going out for a cocktail.
Oh, really?
It's a special drink. It's not something you drink in the morning. And so, you know, we learned that, you know, they drink green tea in the morning. And so...
What about the food?
The food was interesting. I've always liked Japanese food, but my knowledge of Japanese food was an American's knowledge,
That's right.
tempura. What else can I think of? I mean,
Yeah.
I had had sushi,
Sushi, sake.
but I'd never had sashimi, which is raw fish.
Yeah.
And I'd never had some of the other things, and I'll never forget. So, just to back up a second, the very first trip to Japan, like you said, it's an amazing undertaking for that many musicians. And Toshiko didn't have any help. She didn't have like an assistant.
Yep.
As it turned
She's a
out, when we got to
powerhouse,
Japan, she did. But on subsequent trips, she hired somebody to be her kind of her roadie. But, she had to do all the scheduling. She had to do all the planning. So we get to Tokyo. Well, first of all, we get on the plane, and Henry Mancini's musicians were also going to Japan. And his trumpet player's name was Don Rader. And, of course, Bobby Shue was our trumpet player, our lead trumpet player. And the two of them were friends. And this is an important part, so I'll include it. They decided to see which of them could drink all the way. It was a 16-hour flight in those days.
Oh, no.
We had a stopover in Hawaii, so I think that added to the time. But it was 16 hours total from L.A. to Tokyo.
Yep.
And they had decided that they would see. And anyway, so by the time we got to Tokyo, Bobby Shue was like 3 sheets to the wind, as they say. So we get to the Tokyo airport. We get off the plane, and there are all these photographers. I mean, you'd think we were the Beatles. Well, I mean, there were probably 24. I had no idea, first of all, that jazz is a big thing in Japan.
I was just going to ask you
They
that.
have journals.
Yep.
They have clubs.
Yep.
They have like clubs dedicated to Duke Ellington, where you walk in, that's all they play is Duke Ellington's music.
Everything American is a big deal in Japan.
They love
but
jazz. I found, for example, some albums that have been discontinued here that you could still buy there. It was just amazing. So anyway, we get off the plane, and there's all these photographers. And I guess Toshiko didn't know this, but the JVC, the Japanese Victor Corporation, is the Japanese version of RCA. They were in charge of kind of our Tokyo, the Tokyo part of the trip, which was the first leg. And they had this conference room set up, with this big U-shaped table and all these photographers, and they're wanting to ask us all questions. The funny part of the story is Bobby Shue was the one that they knew because he had been on Buddy Rich's band. The rest of us were pretty much nobodies. But Bobby Shue was the one. And so he was, like I said, 3 sheets to the wind. He barely could hold on. And they were asking him all these questions, and he was giving these very slurred answers. So it was all quite funny. So anyway, we finally finished with that. And we go to the hotel.
Oh, my gosh.
And we were staying in what was called a Japanese businessman's hotel, which was basically like we would say like just basically a room,
basic.
no luxuries, no amenities. And I was fine because I'm like 5'5".
Yeah.
But we had some kind of tall guys in the band, and they had trouble because the beds were all small. My room was so small that I couldn't have my bass in the room.
Wow.
I had to put my bass
Seriously?
in like a maid's closet down the hall because the room was that small. And I remember literally
Japanese real estate.
We used to call them our Yamaha toilets. You literally could sit on the john, brush your teeth, and take a shower at the same time. I mean, the whole bathroom was made to get wet.
Yep.
I mean, it was like literally being in a bathroom on a train. Wow. It was so that was a big. All right. So anyway, we do our big opening concert, and this is it's very funny how in life things are connected. We played at a place called the Budokan, which is a martial arts stadium. I mean, it's an arena. It's an indoor,
enormous,
but it's made for martial arts
mostly.
And it holds about, I don't know, between 50 and 60,000 people.
Yeah.
I later played there with Sinatra. That's where we played in Japan later on. So that's kind of funny, too, is that, a few years later, I'm at the same place,
That'd be
not
weird.
with Toshiko, but with Frank Sinatra. Yeah. All right, so we're at the Budokan, and it was amazing. And the band sounded amazing. So anyway, after the gig, the JVC Corporation hosted a reception at this very, very fancy restaurant. And now is when we found out what real Japanese food was like. So we go to this place, and of course, you know, you're sitting at the low table, we're all having a good time, and the sake is, that's the other thing I discovered. Sake is like wine. It depends where it's made. There's many different types of sake. It doesn't all taste the same. Yeah. So we're drinking sake. I never was much of a drinker, so it didn't take me very long to start feeling pretty good. And they brought out this ceramic urn. It was literally about a yard in diameter. And there was a Bunsen burner on the table, kind of like what we call, you know, the days of Mongolian barbecue where they would cook right at the table.
Yeah.
And they fill it with all this liquid, and we look inside, and it's nothing but fish heads. And those are a delicacy. I had never realized that the cheeks of a fish, it's like eating the claws of a lobster. The fish is so delicate and so wonderful, and that's basically what the deal is. But here we are. So there's this huge thing, and of course, as it's heating up, it's starting to smell pretty good, and these fish heads start bobbing to the top. Now we're starting to get feeling pretty good, so we're saying, hey, look at that one. It looks like, you know, some friend back home. Oh, that one looks like Charlie Shavers. That one looks... So, you know, so now we start eating, and the fish head thing was pretty good. I mean, it was pretty good in the broth. But then they brought out some kind of sea urchins. They were alive.
They were alive, yeah.
They were alive. We drank a lot of sake. That was our first. I mean, there was no tempura. There was no sushi. There was no sukiyaki or any of those American, Japanese. This was like the real deal. And the good thing that saved my butt was that there were a lot of vegetables, and I like vegetables.
Good.
So, but unusual things. Yeah. So that was our first experience in Japan. And from there, we were in Tokyo. I think we were in Tokyo for about a week. And then we started touring all over the country. We went up to Sapporo, which is in the northern island. And it was like, well, it was January, so it was cold. And we had so many adventures. And the big thing in Japan is fish. You know, if you get a package of snacks, like what we would call Chex Mix, it would have minnows, dried minnows in it.
Yeah.
So the Japanese are so clever. I mean, first of all, the culture itself is so different. Like, for example, when you get into the snow areas, the sidewalks are heated.
Right.
They never have to shovel the snow off the sidewalk.
Well,
I mean, why don't we do that? I mean, it's obviously expensive, but once you do it once, it's there forever.
That's right.
All right, so anyway.
As long as it works, yeah.
One of my buddies, we're walking around in the afternoon. We see this guy. They looked like little donuts. We should have realized, because they were shaped like fish, that was a tip-off. But we were stupid. We were naive. So we see these. He's got this big iron, and he's putting this batter in. What we didn't see was there was a little hole on the side where he was squirting what we thought was like jelly. It looked like a jelly donut.
Like a jelly
with this
donut?
red,
Yeah.
you know, this red substance. So we figure, oh, these are going to be like jelly donuts. You know, and he takes them out, and he rolls them in powdered sugar, puts them in a bag, and sells them for whatever.
Surprise.
So we think, oh, this is great. You know, we're going to get some, because we were getting pretty desperate for some American food. I mean, seriously, we had been in Japan like 2 or 3 weeks, eating a lot of fish and a lot of strange things. So anyway, well, of course, they're hot. Can you imagine putting something in your mouth that you think is a donut, which is not?
What was it?
And then what we thought would be jelly was fish paste, and it was hot.
Oh boy!
Because it was still warm, you know.
Yeah.
And this thing, like, you know, you squish down on this in your mouth, and this hot fish paste.
Oh, and you're expecting a jelly donut.
And you're expecting like a jelly donut. So that was pretty weird.
That's weird.
But anyway, the people were very gracious. As it turned out, we wound up playing for, again, something that I think is very rare here. There are a lot of private clubs that just get together for jazz
Yeah.
happenings.
Yeah.
They either bring in artists or they get together and listen to a recording. So we played for a lot of private jazz clubs in various locations all over Japan. And they were, anywhere from 50 to 100 people. And that was the bulk of, we did do some big concerts, but the bulk of during the week, we played in some small jazz clubs, mostly for these jazz societies. And we found out that that's like a very common thing.
How common was it to have big bands at that time in Japan?
That's a good question.
Particularly
I'm not sure I
jazz
even
big
know the
bands.
answer to that. I'm not sure they had very many big bands.
It
I
seems
know
like
they had a lot of, they did have some artists that were pretty famous, some soloists. Here's the other weird thing. They had all these, like there's a very famous club in New York called the Five Spot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they recreate, I've been to the Five Spot, it's in the Village. It's, it's like water pipes and...
Yeah.
Well, they recreated the Five Spot on the 10th or 12th story of a high-rise office building. And there it was. You get off the elevator, and you'd think you're in Greenwich Village.
Like a movie set.
Yeah,
There it
like
was.
a movie set. It was just unbelievable.
Interesting.
Yeah, they have a lot of clubs like that. And there were, like I said earlier, there were clubs just dedicated to like Miles Davis
Yeah.
or Duke Ellington. And I remember we went into the Ellington one because that was Toshiko's favorite guy. And the other thing that was unusual is that there were, Suntory is one of the major whiskeys in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And people would buy a whole bottle and then they would put their name like on a little brass plate.
Oh, yeah.
They would put it on the bottle. So once they paid for the bottle, they'd go in and they could just pour
Yeah.
drinks. The
Well,
other
like they
thing
do with chopsticks.
about
Yeah.
the culture, the beers are huge.
Yeah.
And they're meant to share. In other words, the whole thing in Japan is drinking is a social thing. Mm-hmm. You don't drink
Not-
alone.
not
You-
to
it
drink
was
and get
something
drunk,
to
right?
share with
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah.
So that was all very unusual, And we had a lot of adventures. In fact, we played in some part, while getting back to Tokyo, we played a concert one night in an area of Tokyo that was almost like a shanty town. I remember we were in this very busy commercial area, but overhead, in other words, there were all these shops, and overhead were these big pieces of like roofing material, like, corrugated metal roof, but
Yeah.
it wasn't attached to anything. It was just like hanging up there. So the spaces on either side of the roofing material, the rain could come down.
Yeah.
So it was very strange. And I remember one of the things I'll never forget, because I hate snakes, is that there was what do you call it, some kind of religiously affiliated shop that was selling all kinds of odd things, including live snakes. And I remember we saw this
Kind
woman
of snakes.
walking with this bag, and the bag was moving. And then we saw she had just come out of this snake shop. She just bought several live snakes. I don't know what she was going to do with them, but we were like, oh my God,
Do they? Who
Maybe
knows?
they eat them. I don't know. Speaking of food, so one night we see a McDonald's. In fact, it was almost like a mirage. It was a very foggy. They get a lot of fog in the winter because they don't get the cold temperatures that we do, but it gets cold enough that anyway, there's a lot of moisture, and anyway, there was a lot of fog. And one night we were on a break. We were playing at this jazz club, and we were I think we were doing like 2 or 3 sets. So we had like an hour. And it was kind of a small town in the southern part of the main island. And a bunch of us were walking around. We saw the Golden Arches, like through the fog. It was a weird, and like, of course, everything there was fish flavored.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. McDonald's in Japan is not the same as it
and
is
the
in
same thing
United
happened
States.
in Osaka. Osaka's a very big city, and there's a castle. Used to belong to one of the warlords. It's a huge, and here was a guy who looked like he was selling hot dogs on a stick.
Yeah.
And of course, we raced over there. Peter Donald, the drummer, was the first one to get one, and he took a bite and went like, "Oh my God, it tastes like fish." So that was, part of the getting used to. But The people were very gracious. In fact, just the other day, I was cleaning out some papers, and I found this gorgeous little sketch that this guy had done of me and gave it to me as a gift, and I'm going to frame it because it's just beautiful.
I'm going to ask for a copy of that. We'll get it into the show.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to ask if we can continue this conversation.
Okay.
But we have to go for
Well,
now.
are we done?
We're out of time
We're out of time?
We're out of time again.
Okay.
But we will continue this conversation.
Okay. Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you for sharing all these stories. All right, now I had to cut you short on the last show because we ran out of time, but I know there is so much more to tell me.
There is.
So,
yeah.
Toshiko Akiyoshi is a big band, a 17-piece
Right.
jazz band.
Right.
And you're in Tokyo with them for 5 or 6 weeks.
Right.
Okay.
Well, so we talked about the food and how unusual that was. We talked about the rooms being much smaller than what we're used to. One of the things that, of course, was prevalent in America when I was growing up was train transportation. But we don't do that anymore. But the great thing about that trip to Japan is that we took the trains. I think we took one flight in that whole time. Everything else was the train.
The bullet
and it was
train.
the famous bullet
Yeah.
train,
Yeah.
which goes, I don't know how fast, but it was
Fast
just
as a bullet, Don.
amazing. And
So you're traveling on the bullet train.
we're traveling on the bullet train, and one of the interesting asides, to get back to food for a second, they had shrimp more or less like we are used to shrimp in America, like a French fried shrimp.
Yeah.
And so the minute we get on the train, we get out of our seats and go to the dining car and order the shrimp because it was the most kind of Western
It was the closest thing to American
that,
food.
yeah, that we could, so in fact, we called ourselves the Prawn Patrol because
The Prawn Patrol?
no matter what time of the morning it was, we would go and have prawns.
Yeah.
And we also found out that in the morning you can get eel, and it was very interesting. So anyway, one of the adventures on the train is they don't stop for very long, and I always had my base. And there were a couple of times where I almost didn't make it onto the train. I mean, when they stop, it's literally a few
Get on.
seconds.
Yeah.
So we were traveling what's called first class because the seats were bigger. The typical, whatever lower class seats were very small, and they didn't want to make sure we were comfortable. All right, so here I am. I've got the base in the seat, and I'm sitting in the seat, and this guy comes in who's literally as tall as a building. It's this huge guy, and he's showing me his ticket, and his ticket is for where the base is. Now, they sold me a seat for the base, but apparently in those days it was like half price or something. So there was a screw up on the computer. They sold the seat twice. And so here I am, 5'5", and this guy is like huge. He's like 6 something. There's a funny ending to this story.
He needs
and I'm
a
like,
seat.
and I'm standing up, and he's like talking to me, and he speaks no English, and I speak no Japanese. His manager is with him. Finally, Toshiko comes over and starts translating, and I'm, and he's giving me all this grief. Finally, the stewardess, or what you want to call the person that services the train, because like an airplane, they have stewardesses. She found him another seat. Right. The finale to this story is several months later, we're back in Los Angeles. We're actually at a recording session with Toshiko. And one of the guys in the trumpet section says, Baldini, look at this. And this is the sports section of the Los Angeles Times.
Yeah.
And on the front page is a picture of this guy from Japan who is coming to Los Angeles at a martial arts demonstration with Muhammad Ali.
Oh my goodness!
And this is like the guy. So I'm arguing with
And
a
you're
guy who
arguing
could
with
have
him.
probably picked me up and crushed me like a beer can. Pretty funny.
Wow.
Pretty funny. And it's funny though. I wound up buying a Toyota Celica after that trip because that's what I kept getting to haul my base.
That's what you were driving around, and you
or
knew it
once
would
in a while in
fit.
the back of a pickup truck.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was a Celica with the hatchback that would open up and the base fit.
And
in
the
just
base fit.
And that's what they would drive You know,
Yeah.
that's what they would drive me around in.
But
Now, that
yeah.
trip to Japan was memorable for many, many, many reasons. Not only culturally, I mean, we learned a lot about the Japanese culture. We made many, many different, I think I made probably at least a total of 4 trips to Japan with Toshiko. And each time it was enlightening. We were there during cherry blossom time one time, you know, which was just
That must have been spectacular.
unbelievably beautiful. I mean, well, the other thing I didn't realize is that there's still a tradition, mostly between mothers and daughters, that during cherry blossom season, especially young girls who are marriageable age, that the mothers and the daughters go to these parks with the cherry blossom and they take pictures and they wear and they are so elaborate and so beautiful, and we would see this almost on a daily basis. And you know, I don't know if that was something that a young girl would put as part of her but that was quite lovely. And I remember we were in Kyoto, and Kyoto is like a very special city in Japan. It's very religious. They've got lots of temples. I mean, people they make pilgrimages to go to Kyoto. And so there were a lot of that. There were a lot of people in Kyoto getting their pictures taken and the gowns, and it was really, really quite beautiful. Yeah.
Are there recordings that people could look up about you and the Akiyoshi
Oh yeah,
band?
we probably made a dozen or so recordings. The one that I think is the best is called Road Time.
Road Time?
Road Time,
Yeah.
and it's got a picture on the cover of a couple of the baggage tags on a suitcase, and that was recorded actually at the Budokan.
Yeah.
And there's a tune on there that she wrote. It's probably the most commercial tune she ever wrote. It's called Road Time Shuffle, and it's just a jig, you know, one of those. It's just kind of a bluesy. As it turns out.
How'd it go again? How'd it go again?
Jig. As it turns out, it was very famous it was very well accepted at colleges. That particular tune, they did some kind of a poll.
Was it the groove?
It was the groove, yeah. It just was,
responded to.
you know.
Yeah.
Because most of her other stuff, speaking of her music, so the beautiful thing about being in Kyoto was, I can't remember what the name of the piece was, but it incorporated these Japanese musicians. And like I said, when we played the tune in the States, she had a recording. But now we could use the real thing. And there are these temples where they have these drums. I mean, some of them are huge, many feet across, and some of them are small. And these monks, I mean, the drumming and the flute playing is part of the religious experience. So we brought these 2 musicians with us that were part of Kabuki theater, and there's another theater called N-O-H. I don't know exactly what that means, but these were musicians. And they were like, it was kind of like having a combination of a priest and a jazz musician all rolled up into one. They had this whole ceremony that they would do before they performed. It was like part of their warm-up. They were very serious about what they did.
Yeah.
When we were doing music, you could not talk about anything else. You
Very
couldn't make
pure.
jokes.
Yeah.
You couldn't, you know, we Americans, we make jokes everywhere.
Right.
They were very pure. Afterwards, they could hang out and drink with the best of them.
Really?
But and they wore a special, kind of a special robe.
Ceremonious. Everything is ceremonious.
And
right?
they do the, They make these unbelievable sounds. And this one piece incorporated all that, and it was amazing. It was just amazing to play with them and see them and do that. So that was another kind of a plus that we learned. And they were with us, I think, at least 2 or 3 of the trips. I don't know if it was the same guys. I don't remember that. But the other thing I remember about Japan that was quite interesting were the department stores, you know, like a Macy's or something like that. They always had one floor that was nothing but food. So you literally could shop at a department store and bring home dinner. And I remember going to those floors and seeing things that were just like, I mean, like here, we have apples. I mean, we have many different kinds of apples, but they're all relatively the same size. They're like about yay big. You go to the section with apples in Japan, some are like this big.
Really?
And they have like a plastic netting around them so they don't get damaged. And lots of green vegetables and things that we'd never see in a department store here. It was quite the experience. You talk about packaging. You would buy like a simple, let's say you bought a book. They would wrap it in a way that was like you didn't want to open it because it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Or you would buy, I remember, electronics were a big thing. There was something called a Nakamichi. It was a small cassette deck, but it was like professional quality. And we were all buying. I remember buying a ton of lenses for my
your cameras.
And things like that. We
make great
took advantage
lenses.
of that.
For sure.
But I can remember, buying a gift for somebody. It was literally a small vase, like for like one single flower.
Yeah.
And I remember they put it in a wooden box.
Yep.
And wrapped it, and it had this Japanese writing on it, and they put like I don't know, like a little flower or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just
beautiful,
unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, everything. Well, that was the other thing that struck me. I noticed in people's, housing, especially in Tokyo, was very, very expensive. What we learned, the concerts were all like at 6 o'clock or 6:30, and we learned that people would come to concerts after work and then go home, because a lot of them lived so far outside of the city because it was affordable.
Yeah.
And the other weird thing is that they would sell food. So
At the concert?
at the concerts and at the Budokan, now I'm not being disrespectful, but when we eat Asian food, we don't eat it like Asians. We pick up a bowl of rice and think you can eat it with chopsticks, which you cannot. What they do is they put the bowl of rice up to their chin, and they spoon
Sort
it
of
in,
scoop
like,
it in,
like this.
Yeah.
And they often make a kind of a noise.
Yeah.
Well, you get 60,000 people doing it.
Oh, you
in
hear
a
that
concert
clunk, clunk,
hall.
clunk, clunk.
There's like a din that is pretty unbelievable. And that's another thing we just never realized, but a completely different culture. And the thing that struck me, the stores, everything was oriented towards the aesthetics. I mean, you go into a store and the way the clothes were arranged would be so beautiful. You didn't want to pick, like, I remember going in the store that just sold T-shirts, and they had all the colors arranged, literally like a palette, and you would almost be afraid to take one because you would ruin, the whole effect of the rainbow.
Very
and,
neat
and all the
culture,
stores were like that. And I'll never forget noticing in people's houses. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. They would always have one area that was like a little bonsai tree or some flowers, or even in the big cities where literally they might have had a square yard of dirt to plant something in. There was always something of beauty.
Yeah. Did you ever, or would you ever consider moving there?
That's a good question. I think I did think about it, but I decided it was just too different. Although I will say, I remember going to a temple outside of Kyoto. I brought my then girlfriend, Linda, with me on one of the trips. Well, there's a funny story.
Linda, the
there,
vocalist,
too.
yeah.
Well, we got to the end of what typically was our engagement.
The engagement of playing music.
Yeah. And, everybody was going home. And I don't know why, but I still had a bunch of money left over. And we decided...
You didn't drink like the rest of them.
Yeah, we decided we wanted to stay.
Yeah.
So she faked a leg injury so we could go to the airlines and get the ticket changed.
Oh, dear.
And so we stayed an extra 10 days.
Ah.
And while we were there, and this is poignant and sad and worth knowing, there's a war memorial in Tokyo, which is, of course, about World War II. And what I didn't know was the Japanese believe that a person's spirit stays on the earth whatever X amount of years. And we happened to go to that war memorial on the very day that the spirits were leaving the earth and ascending to wherever they ascend.
Really?
And it was a very strange experience being Americans, being at that park on that day. That's the only time we felt a weird vibe.
Yeah.
But, and because we did stay that extra several days, we wound up going to Mount Fuji, taking the train up there, and things that we had passed on the train, but we actually had that time to be tourists because we didn't really have much time to do that. We would get up in the morning, get on the train, and go to wherever the next gig was. So when I was there for that 10 days, just as a tourist, it was pretty amazing. It's quite the country.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend if somebody if it's on their bucket list to do it. It was an amazing experience. Yeah.
And it sounds like you almost did move there, but the real estate is so expensive.
God.
Are musicians paid commensurate salaries
I have no
to
idea.
afford that?
I have no idea. But I know that years later I went there with Sinatra.
Yeah.
And that was a totally different experience because we stayed at the Imperial Hotel.
Yeah.
He had an entire floor for the musicians and for himself. So, I mean, it was like our rooms were luxurious. His wife decided she wanted to buy pearls. So there were these pearl merchants coming literally, all day long. And we were treated like royalty. The song My Way, for some reason, is got some connection with the Japanese philosophy of life.
Yeah.
And so they had these vans, these like Toyota vans that they had painted special with speakers, and they were driving around.
Like driving through the streets?
Playing My Way.
Really?
Yeah, there's like a My Way shopping center. I mean, it's just amazing. And of course, my connection with that song is I also worked with Paul Anka,
Yes.
who wrote the English words. He did not write the song, by the way. Two French people. A Frenchman wrote the music, and a Frenchman wrote the French words. But Paul wrote English words using their melody. So every time the cash register rang for Paul Anka, it also rang somewhere in France for the guy that actually wrote the song.
I'm really sorry that Paul Anka is not there, of course, because he made English lyrics and fantastic. And without these lyrics, My Way is not my way. It's only comme d'habitude.
It's really interesting how that song has, made so much money for so many people.
Thanks to Paul Anka for the lyrics.
They're perfect for Sinatra.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, they were perfect for him. I mean, it was basically an anthem for him. Now,
yeah, it really was. And actually, it's kind of this, he kind of did things his way.
He did.
And it's...
I did not know about the French connection, if you will, though. Do most people know that?
No, they don't.
I think that's an odd...
They think Paul wrote it.
Yeah.
They think he wrote music and lyrics. Yeah. He wrote lyrics for the Tonight Show theme, which I don't think anybody's ever sung.
Do you know them?
I do not know them.
I've never heard. Let's find the lyrics to the Night Show theme.
Johnny, but he made. I don't remember exactly, but it was in the 50 or 60 thousands a year.
Yeah.
Off that song because it got played every night, 5 times a week.
And you toured with them hundreds of times, the Tonight Show, right? You played with them.
Oh yeah,
the
I played
Show.
with them for years.
Yeah.
I was the first call sub.
Yeah.
So that too was interesting.
First person that comes to mind that was on the Tonight Show when you were playing.
Oh God, there's so many of them.
Come on, quick!
I'll tell
First
you a good one. In fact, if people want to go on YouTube, because musically it was one of the best ones. John McLaughlin, the famous guitar player from the Mahavishnu Orchestra, was in town to do a guitar concerto. I don't know if it was at the L.A. Phil or the L.A. Chamber Orchestra or whatever. But anyway, he came on the Tonight Show, and everybody knows him as a rock, acid. He's a gifted guitarist.
Yeah.
But he brought an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And he played Cherokee, which Cherokee, if those of you who don't know it, has been a standard because it's very up-tempo, da, 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 and it has interesting chord changes. And it's always been it's been often used as a unofficial audition piece for young musicians like if you can get through Cherokee,
Oh, yeah.
you know. So
It's tough.
he played Cherokee with
Yeah.
the band. And I remember the tempo, and I remember I was playing electric bass, and I mean, he kept, you know, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and he plays the most amazing solo, and he's playing with a pick.
Yeah.
And it was just, yeah, that's on YouTube.
Huh.
John
John
McLaughlin
McLaughlin.
on The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can remember a famous incident that happened with Ray Charles, who decided he didn't like the way Ed Shaughnessy was playing.
Oh, really?
And right on air, he says, "Drummer, you're dragging, you're dragging." Ray played very much on... Okay, let's talk about this for a second. Most people don't realize there's the beat, but in rock and roll, people tend to play what's called layback. It's like, it's kind of a relaxed form of the beat. In jazz, it's more on what we call on top of it. In other words, it's hard to think of the beat as being an entity, but you can play
Ahead of it or
with an
behind
edge,
it. Right, yeah.
or you can play kind of a laid-back feel, or you can play kind of right on the money.
Yeah.
And those are things as a rhythm section player you have to realize.
Yeah.
And
And Ray Charles?
Ray Charles was on kind of the front edge of the beat. He liked that edge, that on top of it feel. And Ed was not playing that way. And of course we hadn't rehearsed or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, he just came on, and I don't even remember what he was singing, but I remember I was thinking, oh my goodness,
And
this is amazing. You know, he's saying something right on the air, and of course they didn't cut it.
They didn't cut it.
No, they didn't cut it. A lot of interesting. Oh my goodness, the different acts that came on the Tonight Show it was staggering.
Yeah. You mentioned Robin Williams to me one day. You saw him on the Tonight Show.
Yeah. Oh my God, he was. You know, Robin Williams was like a jazz musician. In fact, it's interesting. I used to sub on the Gong Show, and we shot at CBS. It was called CBS Fairfax. It was down right by the famous L.A. Farmers Market.
Yeah.
And
The Gong Show.
the Gong Show shot at the same studio, the same CBS studios where Mork and Mindy was being shot.
Oh, really?
And do you remember Jonathan Winters?
Of course, yeah.
Was on the
He
show
was the
as
baby.
like a baby. Yeah.
He was the big baby, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, comedians and musicians are very similar in that there's improvisation.
Yeah.
And a Robin Williams and a Jonathan Winters, you could say to them, "Can of Pepsi," and they can run with
Off
it. You
they
could
go.
say,
Yeah.
"Bushel of corn,"
Yeah.
and they'll do 20 minutes. I mean, just like a jazz musician, they can improvise.
Yeah.
And we would often, I don't know why it happened, we would often be coming into the parking lot to go to our cars at the same time they were in the parking lot. And they would see the musicians, and they would immediately go into their shtick. They would just ad lib. The thing about comedians is they love to perform. That's their essence.
Yeah.
They are, in a way, flawed that they want to perform.
Yeah.
You know, they want to they want laughs.
Yeah, I mean, a class clown is never
that's
going
an
to be
addiction
silent.
for them.
Right?
It's like applause
For sure.
to a musician. So they would perform for us, and
Yeah.
it often got quite risque.
I bet there's lots
In fact,
you can't
downright
tell
filthy
us. Yeah, you can't
at
tell
times,
us. Yeah.
but it was hilarious.
Yeah.
Hilarious. And Robin Williams
so fast, right?
was just unbelievable. The two
Lightning
of them.
fast.
And you know, Jonathan Winters, I think I don't think it's a secret. I mean, he went into a mental institution more than once. I mean, he's a little bit. I've had a long association with Connie Stevens, the singer.
Yes. Yep.
We became good friends. We even considered getting married at one point.
You conducted
I'm
for her
godfather
too,
to
right?
one of her daughters. All right, so I used to visit her in Los Angeles quite often from Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And one of the times I was visiting her, Sammy Shore, who was the opening act, he was a comedian that she used to use a lot in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, let's go to Sammy's Club. The Comedy Store was Sammy Shore's.
Right.
His wife, Mitzi, people talk about Mitzi Shore because she wound up running it after they got divorced, but it was Sammy's Club.
But it was Sammy's Club.
So we went there one night, Connie and a bunch of her friends, and Robin Williams, David Letterman, and David Brenner, there was one other one. They were all new in town. And we saw them literally right off the boat. And I remember afterwards, I went up and introduced myself to David Letterman because we had the Indianapolis connection. And he said about Robin Williams, the rest of us will never have to worry about working after seeing this guy. I mean, they all acknowledged that he was, I hate to use the word genius, but he literally was a genius. He had the ability to just, I mean, he had this mind, and I think eventually, you know, it tortured him. I mean,
Once again, we have eaten up half an hour like the speeding bullet train, right? But just to end this on an up note, I would love it if you'd come back. I may open up your list again and just pick another name, and we'll just talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about your time in Los Angeles, or maybe we'll talk about your time in Las Vegas, or New York, or here. Whatever floats your boat at that time.
No, this is always fun, and the time goes very fast. I can't believe
Well, you're a great guest.
quickly a half hour. Well, I like to talk, apparently, I guess.
Makes it really easy. Really easy. Dominic said that it's like watching your grandpa tell stories to you.
Okay, well, that's a compliment.
Which is very, because you're very easy and comfortable.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you.
Well, I was Where's Waldo, you know, the Waldo who's always in the background looking at the thing. Standing next to the bass became like the barrier between me and what was going on, and it kind of gave you a way to sort of stand back from the scene and yet be the observer.
I hope you don't mind if I just throw out some names. And
Sure, whatever.
But feel free to say whatever you'd like.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I was very, very lucky. I got to play music and be at some situations like President Reagan's second inaugural, and you know, playing in Monte Carlo for Sinatra with honoring the Grace Kelly Foundation, you know, et cetera, Academy Awards, things like that most people could only dream about. And I never really frankly pursued, but they just kind of happened. You know, you just kind of fall into these situations. So I was very, very lucky. A lot of it's being in the right place at the right time.
Well, you're also very modest. We are talking about people, as you put it, who gave you a paycheck. You really played with these people. Now, I just want to start with the most obvious one, Frank Sinatra.
First of all, I never took for granted that opportunity. Every night, no matter where we were, from the White House to, you know, Royal Albert Hall in London or Carnegie Hall in New York, I always, literally as I was putting on my tuxedo, saying, "You're one lucky son of a gun to get to do this." I mean, I never ever ho-hummed it like, "Oh God, I got to go to work tonight." It was always like, "Boy, you are really lucky," because I was. I mean, I was not only playing with probably maybe the greatest singer of all time, one of the greatest entertainers of all time, but also playing probably the best arrangements that have ever been created for a singer, bar none. I mean, Nelson Riddle, Don Costa, Gordon Jenkins, you know, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, you know, there was never anything that came close to that. So I did appreciate it. There's a difference between composing and arranging. A composer comes up with a new idea, with a new tune, so to speak. Mm-hmm. An arranger takes something that already exists. A song, for example, like "I've Got You Under My Skin." I picked that one because what Nelson Riddle did on that particular arrangement is probably the greatest meshing of voice, vocalist with band that's ever happened. And that arrangement, you know, that song has been done by almost every singer, but the way Frank did it, and the way Nelson arranged it for him, it was magical. And Frank had an appreciation of arrangers, an appreciation that I don't think any other singer I've ever worked with did. He always mentioned the arrangers. He held them in high regard. He always respected the arrangements. He never fooled around with them. a lot of times the arrangements were based on his placing a word in a particular spot. So rhythmically, it was like literally part of the arrangement.
Yeah.
He never fooled around with that. The thing that I'm always amazed at is when I hear the people today like trying to imitate Sinatra, and a lot of them are pretty good at it, but they don't get the fact that he never messed with it. He left it alone. He never got too cute. Yeah, he changed words around and, he did that, but he never messed with the arrangements.
And his phrasing was impeccable.
His phrasing was impeccable.
When he was singing to you, he was just telling you a story. And you felt like he was singing just to you. Yeah.
Yes, and one never appreciates that listening to recordings. But when you see him in person and you realize how the minute he walks on the stage, it doesn't matter if it's royalty sitting in the audience, or if it's the President of the United States, or if it's just us. He touches everybody in the same way. And interestingly enough, men liked him as much as women did.
Will you tell the story about how you ended up playing with Frank Sinatra?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I started the music business as a symphony orchestra musician, and eventually moved to Las Vegas, where I had a job literally before I moved there. I got called from the Harry James Band, and I was offered the job on the telephone.
Yeah, of course.
And it's funny because the agent didn't even ask me anything about my musical background. He asked me what size coat I wore because they furnished, the clothes, and I was the right size.
You were the right size. You got the job.
Size. So anyway, I played with Harry James in Las Vegas for, I don't know, 2-3 years. And at one point, Caesar's Palace decided, well, first of all, Frank had a big incident in Las Vegas at the Sands, where he and Dean Martin were gambling, and they didn't like the fact that the dealer wasn't using a single deck. They were using what's called a shoe, and they had an incident. And I wasn't there. This is just speculation, but I read a lot of newspaper accounts. Apparently, Frank pulled a gun, et cetera, et cetera. So he was banned from Nevada. In fact, he lost his interest in the Cal Neva Lodge, of which he was part owner. Wow. So anyway, I think a year or two went by, and the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace somehow had enough pull with the gambling board in Las Vegas, which controlled everything. Well, actually, the state of Nevada, not just Las Vegas. And they decided, wouldn't it be interesting to put Frank back together with the original band he worked with, which was not Tommy Dorsey. He went to Tommy Dorsey after Harry. After Harry. Harry heard him singing at a place called the Rustic Cabin in New Jersey with the Hoboken Four, which was the original group he was playing with. And Harry hired him literally on the spot. And his first couple of hits, All or Nothing at All, I can't think of another one, but that was a big hit.
Yep.
And so anyway, I was playing with Harry at the time. Yep. And so this opportunity came up, and Harry, of course, said yes. And it's interesting because we didn't rehearse in Las Vegas. Frank had a connection with Warner Brothers because his record label, which was called Reprise, was on the Warner Brothers lot. So we went, the whole Harry James Orchestra went from Las Vegas on buses to Hollywood. We had stayed at one of the old hotels in Hollywood, and we went to the sound stage and rehearsed with Frank for the better part of a week for our opening at Caesar's Palace. So Frank, at that point, was thrilled for a couple of reasons. He loved being back with Harry again, but Harry also had the drummer who was with Count Basie for many, many years, named Sonny Payne. And Frank had recorded with Basie some of his favorite engagements at the Sands were with the Count Basie Orchestra, where Sonny Payne was playing drums. He loved the way Sonny played the beat. Yep. And of course, now Sonny was with Harry as his drummer. So there I was next to his favorite drummer. And so he kind of got used to the sound of the rhythm section. And years later, for some reason, he let his bass player go. They were at New York at Carnegie Hall. and somebody in New York was filling in. I happened to know Joe Parnello, who was Frank's conductor. We were paisans, that never hurts in the music business. And I don't know how it came up, but Joe Parnello said to Frank, remember the guy that played in Vegas? He's available. And so I got a phone call from Joe, and he said, Frank wants you to come and play in New York. We're at Carnegie Hall, and you have to be here tomorrow. And the funny thing is that I was still am, a big Celtics fan. And I had the tickets sitting up on my bulletin board right above my phone for the next night, which was the Celtics' first game against the Lakers. I'm trying to think of what year it was.
In the playoffs?
Yeah, the playoffs. And I kind of said, well, can I come? I'm starting to negotiate about when I can arrive because I wanted to go to this Celtics game. And he said, no, you got to be here. You got to take the red eye, which was like typically a midnight flight leaving LA and getting to New York, some ungodly hour in the morning. And then there was, what about the instrument? Well, in Los Angeles, we had something called cardage, which if you played a large instrument like this one, you had your instrument with a service that would deliver it to the studio. So I had my bass with the cardage service. So, Joe Parnello, who was the conductor, he said, tell the service to take it to Flying Tigers. They're an air transport freight company. They'll bring it to New York, blah, blah, blah. Tell them to bring it to Carnegie Hall. So I did, and I arrived in New York the next morning. I had no rehearsal. I met with Joe for about 15 minutes at Carnegie Hall. We went to see that my instrument arrived, but I had no rehearsal with Frank. Joe warned me about a couple of things, and that was it. I guess my audition was right there on the stage at Carnegie Hall. It's kind of like in sports when they trade you to another team, you go out there and put on your glove and play the game.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No.
Well, it's funny. I wasn't nervous because I knew I had played and listened to that. Well, first of all, I listened to that music as a kid. You're a young Italian kid. Every time a Sinatra song came on the radio, you sang along with it.
Right.
We all did that. I had a lot of his records. I had worked with him that time with Harry. And so it just wasn't that big a deal. So to be honest with you, but besides the Harry James connection, there was one other time. Frank was going to perform at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles, and I think it was for several days. And for some reason, his bass player could make at least one of the rehearsals. It was like, I remember it was like almost an all-day thing. So Joe Parnello, who was this conductor who I had played with Vic Damone, and also Joe used to play at a little club in Encino, and I used to play bass with him. And so anyway, Joe called me, and I was available, so I went there and sobbed, and Frank said, it's nice to see you again. The one thing that struck me about that Universal engagement was that his voice wasn't the same as I remember it being years before in Las Vegas. It wasn't...
It had deepened, or...?
Well, it just was a little more shaky is not the right word. It just, it had aged.
Not as strong.
It wasn't as secure as it used to be. But it still was good. But I do remember that I thought, oh my goodness,
Is it true that you almost didn't take that Carnegie Hall gig because of the Celtics game?
That's true. I was trying to negotiate if I could come a day or two later so I could see that game in person. So here, there's a funny sort of ending to that story, though. So now, all right, so I'm in New York. I land. They send actually a limo to pick me up at the airport.
Sure.
I go to the hotel. I grab a few hours sleep. I meet with Joe Parnello in the afternoon, and he says, we're not going to have a rehearsal, but don't worry. And he just kind of, I guess you wouldn't call it a warning, but he just wanted me to know, in this particular tune, we vamped, like the first 8 bars were never quite, when Frank comes in, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I got through the first show just fine. And at the end of the show, I never realized that I would have to meet with his financial person, who was this lawyer named Mickey Rudin, who was the lawyer and financial advisor to Judy Garland and Marilyn Monroe. And yada, 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 many, many, many people. And I remember him offering, he wrote down a figure on a piece of paper, said, this is what we'd like to pay you per engagement. But I was savvy, and I knew that Frank was only working about 20 or 25 weeks, if that much, out of the whole year. Maybe not even that much. So I wrote down another figure, which was not half as much, but like, say, 2/3 as much. I said, this is what I'd like to have, but I want to get paid year-round. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was wise for a couple of reasons. A musician's pension.
For sure.
And the fact that I would get a check no matter what, that I could still be doing. And so he said, that's fine. Mm-hmm. So that was it. And so I thought I could go back to the hotel now and watch the Celtics. And as it turns out, I'm coming out of the dressing room, and the next thing I know, it says, Frank goes like this, come on, we're all going across the street to the athletic club. My friend Mr. So-and-so is taking us out for dinner. And I'm going like, oh no. So I walk up to Mr. So-and-so, who I'd never met. And I think he was a Middle Eastern guy, because I said, whatever his name was, I said, I don't want to be rude, I've never met you, but I really love the Celtic, and they're playing against the Lakers tonight, and I really want to watch it. He said, I'll take care of you. So we go to the athletic club, we walk in the door, and they start walking towards whatever, I'm guessing the dining area, and he gives me the key to his suite.
Yeah.
And he said, go up on this elevator, when you get to such and such a thing, the door will open, and that's the suite. The entire,
Is it like the
I had never
penthouse or
been
something,
into
right?
somebody's place where the elevator door opened into where the living quarters were.
Sure, yeah.
And I
Pretty
said,
impressive.
really? He said, yeah. So I go up there, and of course it's the penthouse. And so I sit down, and within seconds, there's a knock on the door, and I go to the door. I figure, okay, there's a change of plans. And here's this room service guy, and he said, Mr. So-and-so sent me up to ask you what you wanted for dinner. And I'm going he said, well, here's the
died and
menu.
gone
And
to
I'm going oh my God. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. He said, order anything you want. I said, all right. So I think I ordered, I tried to be somewhat cool and not go crazy. But I ordered salmon or something or other. And there's this big screen TV, and the next thing I know, the food comes up, and there's a bottle of champagne, which I did not order. And so that's how I spent my first evening in New York, playing with Frank Sinatra and getting to watch the Celtics.
Oh my gosh.
In a pretty nice situation.
Pretty impressive. How old were you?
Oh boy. That's a good question. I was probably, it's probably in my 40s. Uh-huh. Somewhere in there.
You started off talking about Harry James and blew by it I played with Harry James for, 2-3 years.
All right, that's a funny story too, by the way. Because I flew out to Las Vegas. I never met Harry. Yeah. I got the suits. We had 2 different suits, and they both had vests that were reversible and things
reversible vests, to get the mileage
vests.
out of them, okay.
So we could, and one suit was blue and one suit was black. One suit was gray and one suit was black. So we could wear the black
daytime, nighttime
jacket with the
clothing.
gray pants, etc.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, and his name was Pee Wee Monty was the manager. A great guy. He'd been with Harry forever. And I said, so what's the deal? He said, well, be here at such and such a time, and you'll get to meet Harry. And I said, okay. So I get there. I'm sure it's cool to tell this on. I get there, and
Let's hope.
I meet the lead alto player, and first thing he says to me, come on out to the car. I've got some amazing marijuana.
Oh, no. Oh, that's legal now.
And
You
I
can
said,
probably say
okay. So we went out to the car and got pretty stoned, and I walked in, and I met Harry, and I finally said, is there any music to look at? And Harry says, oh, I've got some bad news. The last bass player, his name was Red Kelly, by the way, there's a whole aside about him. He wound up actually running for governor in the state of Washington on a party called the Owl Party, and their logo was for people who give a hoot.
Oh, no.
I'm not kidding you. This is,
no.
I swear to God.
Okay.
And anyway, he said, well, Red got his bass stolen in New York,
Oh.
and the music was in the back. So we're getting all the bass book recopied, but you're just going to have to wing it.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, really? Now, look at, I was born in 1940. That music of the big band era was kind of before my time. But luckily for me, Harry was only doing a few of his big hits from the big band days. He basically had Ernie Wilkins and Neil Hefti, who were two arrangers that arranged for the Count Basie band.
For sure.
Arranged stuff for it. Was the Harry James band of the 1960s, because it was 1964 that I joined the band. It was like a white Basie band.
Yep.
That's why he had Sonny Payne as the drummer.
Right.
So I knew most of those charts. But it's funny, my first night on the band, we're standing there
With no music.
with no music, and I'm looking at the left hand of the piano player, and I'm trying to use my ears. And to be honest with you, if I have a weakness musically, I'm not one of those bass players that's super intuitive about chord changes. I have to really work at it. And I don't trust myself. More times than not, I will second guess myself being correct, and my second self guessing incorrect. And so I often am my worst enemy. So anyway.
Well, now, just to give you a moment there, and to say that, in full disclosure, we work together musically as well, and I would never have guessed that about you. You are always Johnny on the spot back there.
Thank you.
So whatever
I've gotten better. But anyway.
Yeah, you'll do, Don.
So
you'll
now
do.
we're like halfway through the show, and Harry's on the microphone, and he said, and now we're going to feature our new bass player on a tune called Green Onions. Now I'm going like, what?
Oh, no.
Thank God one of the people I went to school with was Booker T. Booker T came to Indiana. He was already a big star. He had already had Green Onions as a big hit.
Yeah.
But he came to Indiana University to study trombone, believe it or not. And I got to know him some. And I knew that tune because we all knew that tune because he was our classmate. So I thought to myself, oh my God, is Harry trying to embarrass me or what's going on? So I decided, well, this is where my Italian kicks in sometimes. Instead of being fearful, I get to kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to show you. So I go out there and I lower the mic and they start playing this tune. And in those days, I used to solo a lot with the bow. And so I did. And I started doing all this stuff.
Arco,
at the end, I said, I've got a quiver here that the bow goes into. I kind of threw my bow into the quiver and, like a ta-da. And the people loved it. And Harry loved it. And whatever I did, I don't remember a note of what I played. But apparently I had enough moxie or enough, nerve.
And I heard that you walked right up front with a bass.
I walked right up front. That's it, yeah.
The whole bass and walked up front.
Next to Harry, which I don't think he was expecting. I thought, well, if I'm gonna make a fool of myself, I'll do it in a grand manner. But that sort of endeared me to Harry, and we kind of became good friends.
I knew that you would have all these stories, and we haven't touched the tip of the iceberg. Just read your short list of people that you jotted down this morning.
I was trying to think, but I completely forgot about Andy Williams, who I worked with initially at Caesar's Palace, but then towards the end of Andy's career, shortly actually before he died, I went on the road with him, and we traveled around the Midwest, and we wound up at the Kentucky Derby. So whatever time of year that is, we wound up playing for whatever it was.
May, I don't know. I'm probably
But Peggy Lee, Johnny Mathis, who I worked with a lot, Tony Bennett, Paul Anka, who he lived in Las Vegas, and I was on a couple of his hit records. Helen Reddy, who I worked with pretty much exclusively the first year or so I was in Los Angeles. In fact, a quick story about her is she came backstage one night when my friend Tom Hensley was playing piano, who I'd known from Indianapolis and also from Indiana University. And another good friend of mine, Mike Berkowitz, was playing drums, who I actually talked to this morning. He was a conductor for Marvin Hamlish and made all these orchestra connections. So Mike has been the pops conductor for a lot of different orchestras. But anyway, we were the rhythm section. And Helen came back and said, I've got this song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar, and Numbers Too Big to... We went, are you kidding? That's the corniest thing we've ever heard. Well, it shows you what we knew, because that became not only the song of the day, but a song that basically backed up a whole movement. Vicky Carr, people, I don't know if they remember, Ann Jillian, Steve Lawrence and Evie Gourmet, I worked with them a lot.
I know that this list just goes on and on, but we've run out of time, actually.
Okay.
But I will ask you, would you be willing to come back and
Sure.
share some more stories?
Absolutely.
Hey, Don. Happy holidays.
Nice to be here. Same to you.
Thanks.
Nice to be here again.
Who can we talk about today?
Oh, I don't know. I could tell you a Thanksgiving story. First of all, let me explain one of the ways the music business works and how people get hired. There's something called a contractor. The contractor is usually under contract to whomever, be it NBC or a particular theater or a particular studio like MGM. And that contractor is responsible for hiring the musicians. So the contractor at NBC in Burbank, California, where the Carson show was shot, was a guy named Al Lappin. He was an old vaudeville drummer from New York, tough as nails. He had a grip like a vice, I think he lived to be maybe close to 100. He also founded the International House of Pancakes, which is a little aside. That would usually be enough for most people, but that was like a side. I don't think he had it very long, then he sold it. But he made a lot of money, I know that.
IHOP.
Yeah,
IHOP.
Yeah.
And the Carson show we're talking about is the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson.
The Tonight Show, the
Right.
Johnny Carson Tonight Show. So we all would enter the studio through a certain door for help, basically.
Sure.
So I'm coming through the door, and this was on a Thanksgiving day, and the regular bass player, Joel DeBartolo, may he rest in peace, took off because he had a family and kids and wanted to be home, and I was single. I was the first call sub on the show, so he asked me if I would do the show on Thanksgiving, and I said sure. So anyway, I go walking in the door, and Al Lappin is waiting right there. You never saw him until the actual show. And the first thing he says to me is, "You used to play the violin." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we got a violin for you." I said, "Al, I haven't played the violin for 30 years.
You're playing this thing, right?
I'm playing this
yeah,
thing."
Exactly.
And he said, "That's all right, you'll be perfect." I said, "What's this about?" He said, "Don't worry, we'll tell you when you get on the set." So I go on the set, and here's this rented violin, what unfortunately didn't even have a chin rest. It was just an instrument and a bow. It was a very cheap instrument.
Well, Johnny Carson, they couldn't afford a good violin on that show.
I think they just got it from some rental company. Anyway, so Johnny's on the set, which he never was. I got introduced. That was my one and only time to actually meet him.
Even though you were in the band.
He was always
You
in the band.
toured with him, yeah.
He never was at the rehearsals. I mean, half the time he would show up, he'd park his Corvette 5 or 10 minutes before makeup.
Really?
Yeah, we never saw him. We only rehearsed if there was an act on the show that needed music. We never rehearsed with Carson. All right, so now he's on the set. He explains to me, I'm doing a tribute to Henny Youngman. And Henny Youngman was an old Borscht Belt. If people don't know what the Borscht Belt was basically a bunch of hotels in the Catskills that primarily had a Jewish clientele. And they were famous. Lots of people made their bones, so to speak. Eddie Fisher and people like that came up through the Catskills. So Henny Youngman was a Catskills comedian. He used to play the violin, play a couple of bars, and then he would tell a joke. So what Johnny wanted me to do was play a couple of bars. Johnny would tell a joke. So I said, okay, I could. So I said, what do you want me to play? He says, well, Henny always played Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Now, I got to explain something because this is an integral part of the story. The standard pop tune form is A-A-B-A. The B section is what we call the bridge. The A sections are basically the tune that everybody remembers.
That's right.
So I said to Doc Severinsen, who was the band leader, I said, so do you want me to play Smoke Gets in Your Eyes? Well, of course, I started playing and it was atrocious because they set me up because they did it like in D flat.
Ooh.
And that's a horrible key for the violin.
Yes.
So I'm going like, and Carson goes, that's perfect.
That's what they
and it was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. So we're doing it now, and we're like, you know, and Carson turns to me and says, how come it doesn't sound like it did before? And I said, well, it's going to take another 30 years. I'm starting to get it back. So what they did was, we're doing the show live. I'm live on camera right next to Johnny.
Yep.
And Doc Severn says to me, go to the bridge. Well, then I went like, da, da, rah. And Johnny, of course, started laughing, and he got what he wanted. He got this horrible, well, the aftermath was that because I was on camera, I suddenly now get a check from not only the Musicians Union, but AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists. To put it bluntly, I made about $2,500.
What was your normal pay without being
for
on
that show
next to Johnny?
For one show, about $250.
Wow. So
But it
10
was a
times
holiday,
as
so
much.
it paid double.
Yep.
And I'm sure AGVA had the same idea.
Yeah.
So needless to say, Joel DeBartolo never took off another Thanksgiving, the whole run of the show. But it was really funny. And Carson gives me, you know, he used to do that to the comedians. At the end of the bit, he goes like this, which means like, yeah. And I've looked and looked and looked. I cannot find a rerun of that show. It's got to be out there somewhere.
If anybody's got a clip of this, please send it to us. I mean, I've known you long enough to know everything you say is verifiable. And who could make up a story like that?
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
But you were a good sport about it.
It was pretty funny, yeah, I was.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was a chance to interact with Johnny Carson, which, how many chances do you get to do that in your life?
You played in Johnny Carson's orchestra with Doc Severinsen.
I was the first call sub.
Yeah.
Meaning whenever Joel didn't do it. But in those days, Doc would take the rhythm section with him and go to Las Vegas or go on a tour. So I did it a lot. I did it. I don't know. I remember getting residual checks when somebody bought all of that when Carson retired. And I got about, 850 or 900 checks.
Wow.
But they were all for like $12 or, and I had to sign every one of them.
Yeah.
It took me weeks before I finally deposited all those checks because there were so many of them. But yeah, so I did it a fair amount.
You spent that Thanksgiving being a good sport playing violin.
Yeah.
For Johnny Carson, as Henny Youngman, really the king of one-liners.
Exactly.
And that's how people knew him.
Take my wife.
Take my wife.
Someone take
Please.
my wife.
Right, exactly.
Oh, one of the ones I always remember, and he would look at his suit, and he would talk about, the guy that cut the cloth, and the guy that sewed it together, he said, there's a lot of people making a living off something I haven't paid for yet. That kind of stuff. Henny Youngman talked about real life stuff, as did Jerry Seinfeld. I wouldn't be surprised if he went to the Catskills as a little boy.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with somebody about Henny Youngman versus who gets no respect? Rodney Dangerfield.
Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Rodney Dangerfield. Well, you're bringing up an interesting point. Years ago, I lived in Indianapolis, and there was a club there called the Embers. And the guy that ran it was his name was Bill Ball. He was from the Ball family, the Mason jar, the Ball jar,
right?
Ball State University, etc. Okay, so Bill Ball was kind of like the Donald Trump Jr. of the Ball family.
Oh dear.
The father gave him a bunch of drugstores to run, and so as a hobby, he had this nightclub called the Embers in Indianapolis, and it was a beautiful club, very classy, maitre d' and the whole bit. A lot of those guys worked there. So I got to know a lot of those comedians because I worked with a lot of them. And Jackie Leonard, he was another one from that era. He used to live down the street from me in Las Vegas, and when he'd see me out cutting the grass Jack Leonard was a big guy, and he always wore what we used to call a pork pie hat.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a
Yeah.
straw hat.
Swinger,
And he had
yeah.
this little dog. I don't know what it was. But Jack Leonard was a big guy. He was probably 6'3" or 6'4", and he probably weighed over 300 pounds. So he was what we would call a formidable figure.
Yeah.
And he'd go walking by my house, and it was always funny because the leash was like straight out to the dog. And he'd come by my house. He'd always have a few lines. So when I was in Vegas, a lot of those guys that I had worked with at the Embers would hang out in certain restaurants, and you'd kind of go there to hang out with them.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely amazing. And those guys are in relaxation just the way they are on the stage. I mean, they all try to one-up each other.
Yeah.
There's tremendous competition. There was a guy in those days named Pete Barbuti. He was a great, great, great musician, worked with a group called the Millionaires. And he came to Vegas with that group and then stayed, and he became a stand-up comedian. He was our opening act with Sinatra for quite a few engagements. Just a hilarious guy. And he had a lot of musical humor. Like he talked about being the third trumpet player in a band. And he would take the tune Shanty in Old Shantytown. He'd say, this was my part. Da 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 da. And then he would play the broom. He would take a broom and he would brush it on the microphone and do da 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 da. We play the tune,
Yeah.
but he would do it with the crazy.
That would be the
crazy
rhythm?
stuff like
He
that.
would play the rhythm on the
Yeah,
with
he'd
the
play
broom
the
on a
rhythm with the
microphone.
broom.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
crazy.
remember one night, again at the Embers, I would hand him his broom. And one night I decided to be a smartass, and I brought a vacuum cleaner up on the stage. And just how quick they are. And I hand him the vacuum cleaner, and he says, no, man, I don't play the Fender broom, meaning the Fender being an electric instrument.
Yeah.
That being an electric broom,
That's
that
funny.
I don't know that anybody else
That's a fast
caught
connection,
it.
right?
Yeah, but hell, man, I don't play the Fender broom.
Oh, that's funny. Holidays on the road. How tough is it to hold a relationship together? Or, I mean, you were traveling a lot.
I was. I remember being in New Orleans and coming home on Christmas Eve and the plane being delayed and having to do Christmas shopping out of town,
Oh, yeah.
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was tough. That particular time I was in New Orleans with Teddy Wilson, the wonderful piano player that was played with Benny Goodman.
Yeah.
And Al Hurt, the trumpet player,
Oh.
had a club on Bourbon Street called the 500 Club.
Yep.
And Teddy Wilson was his starring act. We were there for, I think, might have been close to a month. I stayed at a place called Mrs. Felton's Guest House, which is where they filmed the movie Walk on the Wild Side.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And there was that song,
Yeah.
da-dee-da-da.
Yeah.
Jane Fonda was in that movie. She was like 18 years old or something like that.
She's still.
It was Barbara
Thank you for
Stanwyck,
myself,
Lawrence Harvey, Walk on the Wild Side. Yeah. And it was filmed at that place, Mrs. Felton's Guest House. It was an old New Orleans,
Yeah.
French Quarter mansion with the big long hallway, and it opened up this beautiful garden. Yeah.
Who was it that you told me always got a room for the band, but there really wasn't a room?
Oh, that was a guy named Tony Turan. He's the famous trumpet player that went da 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 on the Lucy show.
From Lucy.
Yeah, he
I
was
love
a
Lucy.
character. He would always, if you worked like a one-night gig, it was called a club date. And we'd work a club date at the Beverly Hilton or something, playing for some award show or whatever. And he'd always go up to the desk and he'd say, where's the room for the band? And of course there never was one. But 9 times out of 10, he would get one. He had such a way of it. I'll never forget doing a telethon for, I think it was cerebral palsy, or maybe it was, Easter seals or whatever. And they would, these caterers would provide food. You'd show up on a Sunday morning, because these telethons would go for 2 or 3 days. He'd be there with his whole family.
Yeah.
The food was supposed to be for
brought
people
them
involved
in
with the
to
show.
come and join.
Not your
Yeah.
sons and daughters and grandchildren.
Aye.
But getting back to being on the road, yeah. That gig in New Orleans, I will always remember it because I was sitting at a table, or in a booth, and Al Hurt was sitting in the booth. This was during our break. And the guy he was sitting with, I later found out, was a man named John Meacham, who was the owner of the New Orleans Saints. They were not even a team yet. They were in discussion. This was in December. I guess the team became a team the following year. And I'll never forget Al Hurt saying to John Meacham, yeah, let's call them the Saints so I could play when the Saints go marching in whenever they come on the field. So
That's
there
how
you
they got
go.
their
I
name?
mean, talk about eavesdropping,
You know,
a little piece of history.
it's always interesting to me. It would be one thing if you just had these sort of stories where you're the lead character and you're telling stories about yourself. But what fascinates me about you and why I wanted to do the show with you is because the chain reaction between the things that you've experienced is like a clown's pocket. You never know what's coming out. And it all just sort of rolls around in your head and the stories just come out. We will never have enough time to get all your stories.
Well,
But-
you know, those days, show business was a very incestuous community. I mean, everybody knew everybody.
Yeah, you mean that in the
I mean
most
that
platonic
in the
way,
most
yes.
innocent way.
Yes. Yep.
And the thing is that I can remember walking on the streets of Prague and running into somebody.
Really?
And I can also, because I was in a movie for a few seconds. There's a movie with Peter Sellers called Being There.
Ah.
It's based on a Jerzy Kosinski play about a guy who's just in the right place at the right time, or in some cases at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where the lead character, his name is Chauncey the gardener. He was the gardener to a multimillionaire, but they make his name Chauncey Gardner, and he goes on a show like The Tonight Show, and Johnny Mandel, who did the music for the film, is conducting, and we spent a whole day, by the way, doing that one 30-second scene. But anyway, the camera pans the band, and it comes in on me, goes past me, goes to Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
I'm on camera for maybe 5 seconds at the most.
Yep.
But people have walked, that movie is such a cult favorite. People have walked up to me in New York. You were in Being There. I mean,
Really?
Don't ask me why that's so memorable. I
Isn't
mean,
that something?
it's just a matter of seconds.
You are recognizable.
Well, and there was a funny reputation in Los Angeles that a lot of the conductors, if we were doing a TV special or something, they had this fantasy that I was always on camera. So we did a special with Reagan, where he was just one of the guys. Again, it was called a tribute to Dutch Reagan. That was his nickname.
Yeah. Before he was
and,
President
and
Reagan.
the conductor, Nick Perito,
small
who's
way
also
along.
passed away, he said, I want you in front of me, Baldini, so I'll be on camera. And sure enough, you could go on YouTube. It's on YouTube. I'm on camera like practically the whole show.
That's so funny.
It's just funny that way. I don't know what it was, but anyway.
You know, you're talking about doing music, having music for the shows, and we've had this conversation many times about what if there was no music behind a show?
Oh my God.
How much music means to people.
Well, I can tell you from experience, Jaws, without the music,
You did Jaws too.
I did Jaws too.
Yeah.
And without that, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Think about Psycho without her being in the shower. That weep, 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 weep. You know, think about, and then there's some music in
There's a theme
Psycho
here.
where she's driving the car
Yes.
to the motel and it's raining, and there's this kind of like da 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 da. This, but the music has this ominous quality about it.
Yeah.
You know something's going to happen.
Or the music in Love Story. Tell me a story about Henry Mancini.
Again, may he rest in peace. Just the nicest gentleman, just the nicest guy. I mean, with all his fame and the fact that he could have just been an egomaniac, he was just one of the guys. I worked with him when I was in Indianapolis, just out of college. I was there, got a job with the Indianapolis Symphony. And when I was in college, I was part of a band run by a guy named Al Cobain at Indiana University. And we used to have a big weekend called the Little 500. and they would have celebrities come and do a big show. And Mancini and Andy Williams came one year. And so he remembered the Al Cobain band. So he and Andy Williams were doing a tour of basically a little bit of the Midwest and mostly the Southeast, the Carolinas, Georgia, etc.
Yep.
And he called Al Cobain to put the band together. And of course, Al Cobain got some of the faculty,
Sure.
Bill Bell on tuba,
He's got the stuff to draw
with the
from.
New York Philharmonic.
Yeah.
Joseph Gingold was the concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra under George Zell. Those are the kind of people he got to play in it. And me.
Yes.
And I'll never forget, it was probably 20 years between that and when I saw him again in Los Angeles at a party. And he remembered my name.
Oh.
I mean, Henry Mancini, I'm a nobody to Henry Mancini, and yet he remembered my name. And that was, in fact, you sing a song that I turned on to you.
Oh,
from
Soldier in the
his
Rain. Soldier
film
in the Rain.
Soldier in the Rain.
Yeah.
And I remember of all the great tunes,
Oh.
that's the one he rarely played on his show. That's the one tune he would play on the piano.
Really?
And it's probably one of the least recognized of all his, everybody knows Moon River, Days of Wine and Roses.
Right.
I'll tell you a funny story though. Okay, so he was a piccolo player. He had played, I'm trying to think of what band he played in. It was one of the early dance bands. He was the piano player. But he also, I don't think he played piccolo in the band, but as a kid he played the piccolo. So we're out to dinner one night and we're having Alaskan crab legs. And I'm feeling it, and I said to the guy who was the lead alto player, I can't remember his name, but I said, this crab legs feels a little bit like the piccolo.
Yeah.
And he said, good, give it to me. I got an idea. Hank, we used to call him Hank. He used to play piccolo.
You used to call Henry Mancini Hank.
Hank, yeah.
Oh, well, of course you did.
He used to play piccolo on Baby Elephant Walk.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what.
I love that you can sing this stuff for people who don't know what this is, but absolutely.
So the deal was, Bob Smith.
That was the
Was the lead alto player.
alto sax.
And his job was to hand Henry the piccolo. And sure enough, that night at the show, he's got the crab leg instead of the piccolo.
No.
And he hands it to Henry, and Henry doesn't know it's a crab leg, puts it up to his mouth, and of course, nothing happens, and throws it. We used to call him Smitty. He throws it at Smitty, and of course, it bounces up and goes into the piano. Now, Smitty's got to go into the piano and retrieve the crab leg. The audience, of course, is cracking up. And
Is this live?
yeah, live
Oh, my
in front of
gosh.
some, 20,000 people
Ay,
at
ay.
some stadium in North Carolina or something like that. But Hank was a good sport. He was always, good for a
Great.
laugh. And
His daughter is a fabulous vocalist.
fabulous
I don't know
singer.
if people really know her.
And she's
but
married
Monica,
to a famous drummer.
She is?
Yeah, who also worked with Sinatra for a while. Yeah, he's a great
quick.
drummer.
6
And the two of
degrees.
them, I'm a big fan of Ennio Morricone, especially the music from Cinema Paradiso.
Yeah.
So they got permission from Morricone before he died to put words. So she and her husband wrote the words to that, one of those love themes.
Yeah.
Again, incestuous world.
Oh
The
my
music
gosh, yeah.
business is very, very tight. Everybody literally works with everybody.
You're a conductor as well as a teacher. You conducted for somebody for a long time. And if you
Connie
just-
Stevens.
Yeah, if you'll just tease it just a little bit, just tell us a little bit about that. Maybe we'll make time for a full story
Well,
about
Connie
it. but-
was a really good friend. I got to know her because I was her bass player for many, many years. And then when I started conducting for her, one of my students played bass for her. So it was a long time as association, I'd say a good 25 years.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of, one very funny story was we were at the Flamingo Hotel.
Yeah.
And that's when, high tech started coming into the music business. In the old days, everything was done. The orchestra was in front of you and the singer was there. Well, in this particular case, her producer got this wild idea to have the rhythm section on stage, but the stage was movable. That in itself spells danger.
Yep.
Okay? Danger.
Yes.
So the whole rhythm section is on the stage. The whole string section and the brass and the woodwinds were up in a balcony with a television camera, or rather a television screen,
Yeah.
with a conductor on a camera. But here's what nobody figured
no.
out. All these great technical minds, right? The camera was on the moving
Oh, the moving
platform
stage?
that the rhythm section was on.
Oh, no.
So the minute they pulled the platform back, the conductor was out of the range of the camera.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So she
Yeah.
was doing this, I don't know what the heck it was, some big dance number. And you could hear it. The conductor, well, the other thing was, from where he was standing, the curtain hit him on the head. That was the other thing,
Oh,
and
great.
almost knocked him out.
Great.
So here we're playing, and you could hear the rest of the orchestra kind of like just peter out because suddenly there's no beat. And, obviously they put the camera somewhere else. But with all those rehearsals, and these people get thousands of dollars to come up with this stuff. And to think that when the
Right, it's
now
on the
today
moving stage.
we have cameras that are more sophisticated.
Yeah.
They would automatically focus.
That's right. Yeah.
But this was, we're talking like the 70s.
Right. Yeah.
So there was no such thing.
I want to thank you for telling us that story. It's all we have time for today. But,
Okay.
But I know we'll be back. Happy
Have
holidays.
a good holiday and have lots of turkey and have lots of Christmas presents and all that stuff. I was just going to say something. Because generally, people have no idea how this all happens. How musicians can get together. I mean, in all honesty, we've all played together a lot. But we haven't seen each other for a month. And we don't rehearse. And it's like, people wonder, how does this happen? How could they figure this stuff out? Well, number one, I hate to admit it, but there are certain cliches that happen in music. And when you're an experienced musician, you start learning these cliches almost from the first time you take a lesson with somebody. There's certain chord changes that are cliches that follow one another. It's basically like a conversation. If a bunch of you all read the same play and agreed to get together, and tonight you're going to do My Funny Valentine, the play. Well, you've all studied the play, so you know it. So you know the basics of it. You know it's a story about a boy and girl who fall in love on Valentine's Day. Well, every one of these tunes is a story and a small play in itself, and it has a form. But all we really get on this music, there's nothing written out but the chords. Show them what a chord is. Just play a chord. That's a chord. So what was that? An F? Was that an F minor?
F minor?
Okay. Well, whatever the chords are, they're all written out. But that's all I have on my paper. It doesn't tell me anything about what to do. So you have to, from listening to recordings and playing with other musicians and doing it for years and years and years and years, and you learn basically, it's like having a recipe and then elaborating on it, putting your own little stamp on it. And there's so many different ways you could do it. I'll turn it over to you.
No,
We're both teachers, you can tell.
you just said all you got on your page is F minor. Mine says, do not pass go, do not collect 200. Okay.
Okay. So anyway, the amount of experience, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back.
It's okay, I'll do it.
But the amount of experience it takes and the various directions you go are infinite. It's like taking a recipe for beef stew. You could give it to 10 different cooks and you're going to get 10 different versions. Some work better than others. Some are really good and some are just okay. That's kind of the way it is with music. So anyway, there's a lot of improvisation.
There's a lot of different ways to go. Often we don't know what Frances is going to do for an ending. Sometimes she doesn't know what we're going to do for an ending.
Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do for an ending.
And it all
Yeah, we
takes
get there.
amazing listening between one another. And that's part of why it's so much fun. Because it's like getting together with a group of friends and you're going to discuss a particular book, but you have no idea which direction people want to go in. And that's what makes it fun. So we actually have as much fun doing this for you, maybe more fun than you have listening to us. So thank you for letting us do this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
That was a great Don Baldini.